Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was reborn in One Piece and built a harem with Nami, Robin, and Boa Hancock? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Storm Child of Kokoyashi. The first sensation was pressure. A crushing, absolute weight, as if an entire ocean was condensed into a single point of consciousness. There was no light, no sound, only the suffocating embrace of the deep. Then came the memories, not as a gentle stream, but as a violent, chaotic torrent. A village of fire and shadow, a grinning fox of impossible size, the bit. Tang of betrayal in a rain-soaked valley, and a final, blinding clash of gold and purple energy that tore reality asunder. A name echoed in the void, a whisper of a life that was, Naruto. But that name felt distant. A faded photograph of a boy he no longer was. The memories were his, the will was his, but the form was, new. The pressure relented, replaced by a churning vortex. He felt the cold brine of the sea knot on his skin. But as his skin, he was water and salt and raw, untamed energy. The currents were his sinews, the tides his breath. A storm raged above, its lightning illuminating the maelstrom below. And he felt a kinship with its wild, furious power. With a final, explosive surge, he was spat from the ocean's maw. He landed on a crescent of white sand with the force of a cannonball, carving a shallow crater at the edge of a dense, emerald jungle. For a long moment, he lay there, steam rising from his skin as the water that had formed him evaporated into the humid air. He pushed himself onto his hands and knees. The coarse grains of sand a novel sensation. He looked at his hands. They were his, yet not. They were uncalloused, unscarred, the hands of a young man in his prime. Yet they vibrated with a power that felt both ancient and utterly new. He stood, naked and disoriented, and took in his surroundings. A small, uninhabited island, teeming with life. And he could feel it all. Not just see or hear it, but feel it. He could sense the lazy thrum of life in the swaying palms, the skittish heartbeat of a lizard hiding beneath a rock, the slow, patient existence of the coral reef just offshore. It was as if the world had a voice, a chorus of life forces, and he could suddenly understand the song. His past life's energy, the chakra of a shinobi, had been unmade and remade by this world. It was different now, tethered not to a tree or a frog, but to the very essence of will and life itself. He closed his eyes, reaching for that familiar warmth in his gut. It was there, a roaring sun where a flickering candle had been. He held out a hand, trying to shape it, to form the spiraling sphere that had been his signature. A ball of energy appeared, but it wasn't the whirlwind of chakra he expected. It was a solid, silent orb of pure, incandescent light, humming with a pressure that bent the air around it. It felt less like a technique and more like a piece of his own soul given physical form. A name for this place, this life, came to him, carried on the sea breeze. He was a child of the storm, a being of untamed will. He wasn't Naruto Uzumaki anymore. That boy's story was finished. Looking out at the endless, churning ocean, he decided. Arashi, he said aloud. His voice was new, a deeper timbre than he remembered, yet it felt right. The storm. It was a fitting beginning. The first year was one of rediscovery. Arashi learned the boundaries of his new existence on that secluded island. He hunted strange, colorful beasts not for sport, but to test his speed. He could move like a flicker of lightning, his feet barely seeming to touch the ground. He tested his strength against the unyielding cliffs, shattering stone with casual blows that carried a strange, disruptive energy. The rock didn't just break, it felt like its very essence was momentarily unraveled. He spent his days in meditation, not in stillness, but in motion. He ran the coastline, his feet pounding a rhythm against the sand, sinking his breath with the crash of the waves. He swam into the crushing depths, his body adapting to the pressure as if it were born for it. He was learning to control the raw power that suffused him, giving it name and function. He called the awareness of life force the dominion of the world. It was more than just sensing presence. He could feel the ebb and flow of emotions, the fear of prey, the aggression of a predator, the simple contentment of a basking sea turtle. He could stand at the island's highest peak and feel the emotional texture of his entire domain. He named the energy that hardened his skin and empowered his strikes the dominion of the flesh. When he willed it, his limbs would take on a deep, obsidian sheen, radiating a visible aura of power. It was an armor of life force, a shield and a weapon forged from his own spirit. And then there was the most potent, most dangerous aspect of his new power, the dominion of the soul. He discovered it by accident. A large, territorial sea king, a creature reminiscent of a gargantuan eel with a tiger's stripes, had breached near his shore, roaring a challenge. Arashi had felt its primitive, instinctual rage. Instead of fighting it, he had simply focused his own will, his desire for peace on his island, and projected it. It wasn't a request, it was a command. The beast had flinched as if struck, its rage dissolving into confusion, then primal fear. It had lowered its head in submission before sinking back into the depths. He could impose his will upon the world. The thought was as intoxicating as it was terrifying. He also learned to give his will a more tangible form. He focused, splitting a piece of his energy from himself. Beside him, an identical copy of Arashi coalesced from shimmering air. It wasn't a fragile, expendable shadow. It was solid, durable, and connected to him by a thread of consciousness. A manifest will. It could think, act, and fight independently. He could only manage one at first, and the effort was draining, but the tactical possibilities were limitless. For 3 years, the island was his world. He learned its secrets, mapped its every corner, and became the undisputed master of his small kingdom. He wore simple clothes fashioned from woven leaves and animal hides. He was self-sufficient, powerful, and utterly alone. A familiar ache began to grow in his chest. The same loneliness he had felt as a child in a village that had shunned him. He had all this power, but no purpose. He was a storm with no direction, a king with no people. Then, one evening, as the twin moons of this world began their ascent, it came. A feeling, carried on the wind from leagues away. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated human misery. Grief so sharp it was a physical pain. Desperation so deep it felt like drowning, and a furious, self-destructive rage that clawed at his senses. It was the most potent emotional signal he had ever felt, a scream of a soul at its breaking point. It was so intense it made him stumble, his hand clutching his chest. It was a call, a purpose. Without a second thought, Arashi sprinted to the water's edge. He didn't need a boat. He took a breath, focused his energy into the soles of his feet, and stepped onto the surface of the ocean. He pushed off, and the water held. He ran. A plume of spray erupted in his wake as he raced across the sea. A golden comet streaking toward the source of that terrible, compelling pain. He arrived at the Konami Islands as dusk bled into night. The feeling led him to a specific village, a place called Kokoyashi. He didn't enter immediately. The impulsive boy was long gone, replaced by a man who had learned the value of patience and information. He found a high perch in the trees overlooking the village and Arlong Park. A grotesque structure that pulsed with a malevolent, predatory arrogance. From his vantage point, Arashi extended his dominion of the world. The village was a sea of quiet despair and simmering fear. The people's life forces were dim, suppressed, like embers on the verge of being extinguished. But the cry he had followed was a bonfire in their midst. He focused on it, finding its source. A young woman with vibrant orange hair, kneeling before a simple grave marker. Her name, he learned from the whispers on the wind, was Nami. He saw her lift a knife, saw her turn it on the tattooed symbol on her shoulder, a stylized version of the Jolly Roger he saw on Arlong Park. He felt the spike of agony as she began to stab herself, a desperate attempt to carve out the symbol of her enslavement. It was her pain he had felt from across the ocean. He watched as a boy in a straw hat arrived, stopping her, and a raw, primal scream of, "Help me," was torn from her throat. The boy's response was to place his hat on her head and roar a declaration of war. It was a noble, if reckless, gesture. Arashi felt a flicker of respect for the boy's conviction, but he saw the bigger picture. A frontal assault was what the fishmen expected. It was a battle of brutes. Victory might be possible, but it would be bloody, and it wouldn't solve the underlying problem. He sensed another presence nearby, a marine ship, captained by a man whose aura was a disgusting slick of greed and cowardice. A rat, This wasn't just a pirate problem, it was a corrupt system. Saving the villa GE meant more than just beating the biggest fish. It meant tearing out the entire rotten structure, root and stem. Arashi formulated a plan. It was cold, efficient, and absolute. As the boy in the STR had began his one-man assault on the front gate, Arashi slipped away, a ghost in the twilight. He created a single clone, a silent copy of himself. Go, he commanded, the order transmitted telepathically. Do not engage. Weaken the foundations, the pillars in the lower levels. Infuse them with disruptive energy. When the time comes, I want the entire monument to their pride to crumble. The CL-1 nodded once and melted into the shadows, heading for the unguarded waterways beneath Arlong Park. It was a shinobi's task, one of sabotage and unseen infiltration. Arashi, meanwhile, turned his attention to the rat. He moved through the trees with impossible speed and silence, appearing on the deck of the marine ship like an apparition. The Marines on watch barely had time to register his presence before a wave of his will, his dominion of the soul, washed over them. It wasn't an attack, he simply projected overwhelming fatigue. They slumped to the deck in an instant, fast asleep. He found the captain in his cabin, gleefully counting stacks of berry. The man had the face of a rodent, with a long nose and whiskers. Nezumi, that's a lot of money, Arashi said, his voice calm and quiet in the small room. Nezumi yelped, spinning around and fumbling for his pistol. Who the hell are you? Arashi didn't move, he just looked at the captain, and let the man see the faintest glimpse of what he was. He didn't need to project anger or killing intent. He simply let Nezumi's own soul be his tormentor. With his dominion, he reached into the man's psyche and amplified his own corruption. Nezumi froze, his eyes widening in horror. Suddenly, the gold coins on his desk seemed to drip with blood. He could feel the suffocating despair of the villagers he had extorted, the silent screams of the lives his greed had ruined. Every dirty deal, every blind eye turned, every bit of human suffering he had profited from crashed down on him at once. He saw himself for what he was, a parasite, a scavenger feeding on misery. The self-loathing was a physical force, a crushing weight that buckled his knees. He dropped his pistol and clawed at his face, gibbering in terror, his mind shattering under the weight of his own sins. Arashi calmly walked past the catatonic marine, gathering the stolen treasure into a large sack. He slung it over his shoulder and stepped back onto the deck. He didn't need to sink the ship. A captainless, leaderless vessel was functionally useless. He left them adrift in their own incompetence. He returned to the outskirts of the village just as the real fighting was reaching its peak. The straw-hatted boy was engaged in a furious battle with the shark-like fish man, Arlong. The other members of Arlong's crew were either defeated or tied up with the other pirates who had accompanied the boy. It was a brawl, full of shouting and raw power. Arashi waited. He walked to the edge of the village, near the simple grave Nami had been kneeling at. He placed the heavy sack of money on the ground and watched. The final blow of the fight was spectacular. The boy, Monkey D. Luffy, smashed Arlong down through the multiple floors of his own tower, bringing the central structure down in a heap of rubble. The villagers roared in triumph. It was a great victory. But as the dust settled, Arashi could feel the fishermen's hatred still simmering. They were defeated, but not broken. Their ideology, their belief in their own superiority, was untouched. They would return, or others like them would. This was a temporary reprieve, not a permanent solution. As the villagers celebrated, a group of the remaining fishmen, led by the octopus swordsman Hachi, tried to slip away into the water. Leaving so soon, Arashi's voice cut through the celebration. He stood before them, blocking their path to the sea. The sack of money sat at his feet. Nami, her eyes wide, recognized the sack instantly. It was her life's work. Her village's salvation. Hachi drew his 6 swords, his face a mask of desperation. Get out of our way, human. No, Arashi said, his tone flat. He made no move to draw a weapon. He simply stood there, a figure of absolute calm. Your reign is over. Your hatred has no place here anymore. The fishmen charged. Arashi acted. He didn't move from his spot. Instead, 3 clones of Manifest will flickered into existence around him. One met Hachi's 6-sword flurry, catching all 6 blades in one hand. the sound of screeching metal echoing as his hardened skin proved stronger than steel. With his other hand, the clone delivered a single, open-palmed strike to Hachi's chest. It wasn't a killing blow, but it carried that disruptive energy. Hachi's eyes rolled back in his head as the flow of energy in his body was violently interrupted, and he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Another fish man, Chu, spat a jet of high-pressure water. The second clone simply thrust a hand forward, and a silent, invisible barrier of force met the water blast, causing it to explode into a harmless mist. The clone then vanished and reappeared in front of Chu, a single finger tapping him on the forehead. The fish man went rigid and fell like a board. The martial artist, Kurubi, launched a series of devastating fish man karate strikes at the third clone. Each blow, powerful enough to shatter stone, met an unyielding defense. The clone moved with fluid grace, redirecting the blows until Kurubi overextended. Then, it struck, a simple chop to the neck that felled him instantly. In less than 10 seconds, the remaining commanders were neutralized with contemptuous ease. The other fish men froze, their minds unable to process the sheer disparity in power. Arashi then turned his gaze to the rubble of Arlong Park, where the original Arlong was beginning to stir. Pulling himself from the wreckage, he was bleeding, furious, but far from dead. Luffy, Nami shouted in warning, but Luffy was exhausted, spent from his battle. Arlong staggered to his feet, his eyes locking on Arashi. More trash. I'll kill you all, he roared, his voice thick with blood and hate. Arashi walked toward him, his steps slow and deliberate. You built an empire on the tears of a single girl, he said, his voice carrying across the battlefield. You took her hope, her family, her future. And for what? For a sense of superiority. For a pile of worthless paper. You know nothing. Arlong bellowed, charging forward, his massive serrated nose sword aimed at Arashi's heart. Arashi didn't even attempt to dodge. Just as the blade was about to pierce his chest, he raised his hand. His fingers, now coated in the black sheen of his dominion of the flesh, clamped down on the Kiribaki. Arlong strained, putting all his monstrous strength into the push, but the blade wouldn't move an inch. It was like trying to push a mountain. I know everything, Arashi replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He squeezed. With a sound like cracking porcelain, the legendary saw-toothed blade, Arlong's pride and joy, began to fracture. Cracks spread from Arashi's grip until the entire weapon shattered into 100 pieces. Arlong stared in disbelief at the stump of his prized weapon. That moment of shock was all Arashi needed. He stepped forward, his fist buried in Arlong's gut. It wasn't a blow meant to send him flying. It was a deep, penetrating strike that pulsed with power. Arlong gasped, his body seizing up, but the physical attack was only part of it. At the moment of impact, Arashi unleashed his dominion of the soul. He didn't just project his will, he opened a floodgate. He forced Arlong to feel everything. The crushing despair of every villager in Kokoyasi for the past 8 years. The agony of Belle Mare's last moments. The unending, soul-crushing weight of Nami's sacrifice. Every tear she shed, every moment she wanted to die but forced herself to live. He made Arlong experience the totality of the suffering he had created. And he didn't stop there. He broadcast that feeling to every remaining fishman on the island. They all collapsed, clutching their heads, screaming as the psychic backlash of their own cruelty washed over them. Their arrogance, their belief in their supremacy, was burned away by the truth of their victims' pain. Arlong's eyes, wide with a horror far beyond physical pain, looked at Arashi. He saw not a man, but a force of judgment, an avenging angel of the sea. This, Arashi said, his voice devoid of all emotion, is justice. He pulled his fist back and delivered one final, clean blow to Arlong's head. The fish man dropped, his body broken, his spirit shattered. There was no defiance left, no hatred. There was only an empty shell. It wasn't a victory, it was an execution. The island was silent, save for the whimpering of the defeated pirates. The villagers, Luffy and his crew, all stared at Arashi, a mixture of awe and fear on their faces. He had not just won a fight. He had passed a sentence. He turned and walked back to Nami. He gestured to the sack of money. This is yours, he said simply. 100 million berry. You're free. Nami stared at him, then at the money, then at the broken form of Arlong. Tears streamed down her face. But for the first time in years, they were not tears of sorrow. She looked at this stranger, this man who moved like a storm and spoke with the weight of a god, and she saw not a monster, but a miracle. The celebration that night was a legend in the making. But Arashi didn't partake in the revelry. While the Straw Hats feasted and drank with the villagers, he and his clones went to work. They dismantled the rest of Arlong Park, salvaging usable materials. They reinforced damaged homes. Arashi walked through Belle Mare's tangerine groves, gently touching the trees that had begun to wither from neglect. A soft, golden light flowed from his hands into the soil, and the villagers watched in stunned silence as the leaves seemed to regain their color, the very life of the orchard returning before their eyes. He wasn't just a warrior, he was a creator. Later, Nami found him standing on the cliffside, looking out at the sea. She had changed into a simple dress. The tattoo on her shoulder now covered by a fresh bandage, beneath which was a new design, a mikan and a pinwheel. "You didn't have to do all that," she said, her voice soft. "The rebuilding, the orchard, a problem isn't solved until the foundations are secure," Arashi replied, not looking at her. "Beating Arlong was just clearing the rot. Now, you can build something that lasts." "Luffy asked me to join his crew," she said. "To be his navigator." Arashi finally turned to her. He could feel the conflict in her, the loyalty to the boy who had fought for her, and the undeniable pull she felt toward the man who had given her something more. "He's a good man," Arashi acknowledged. "He has the will to protect his friends. His path will be one of great adventure." "And what is your path?" she asked, her gaze steady. "I don't know yet," he admitted, his honesty surprising her. "I was reborn into this world without a purpose. I have this power, and I feel a responsibility to use it. I say, a world run by filth like Arlong and Nezumi, ruled by nobles who think their blood makes them gods. I see a justice that protects the corrupt and punishes the innocent. I think my path is to tear it all down and see if something better can grow in its place." His words resonated with a truth that Nami had lived her entire life. Freedom wasn't just the absence of chains. It was the ability to choose your own destiny. To build your own future. Luffy offered adventure. Arashi offered revolution. "You can't do that alone," Nami stated. "A revolution needs a map. It needs resources. It needs someone to navigate the treacherous currents of the world." Arashi looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the fierce ambition that had allowed her to survive for so long. He saw a partner. "I need a navigator," he said, a small, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time. "One who can chart a course to a new world." Nami's own smile was brilliant. "Like the sun breaking through the clouds. My dream is to draw a map of the entire world. To do that, I'll need to see it all. Even the places that haven't been built yet." She took a step closer, her decision made. "But a ship and a crew will be expensive." Arashi chuckled, a warm, rich sound. "Then it's a good thing we have a brilliant financial mind on our side." He extended his hand. "Chart the course, Nami. I'll clear the way." Quote. She took his hand. It was a firm, solid grip, a promise of power and protection. In that moment, their destinies intertwined. It wasn't a whirlwind romance or a declaration of love. It was a partnership, forged in the fires of liberation and built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared ambition. It was the beginning of something that would shake the world. Far away, in the Grand Line, Vice Admiral Garp leaned back in his chair, munching on a rice cracker. A flustered intelligence officer stood before his desk, holding a report that had been flagged. "G'd and escalated all the way from the weakest of the four blues." "Say that again," Garp said, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. "Sir," the officer stammered, "the initial report from the Konami Islands was incoherent. Captain Nezumi of the 16th branch was found in a state of psychological collapse, babbling about his own sins. The Arlong pirates, a crew with a 20 million berry bounty, were completely annihilated. Their base was leveled. Local witnesses are unreliable, sir. They speak of a boy in a straw hat, and another man, a storm god, who appeared from nowhere." Garp stopped chewing. "A storm god. He supposedly defeated the remnants of Arlong's crew without moving." created copies of himself, shattered Arlong's blade with his bare hands. And according to the one coherent fish, man we could interrogate before he passed out from fear, he made them all feel the pain of their victims. He didn't just beat them, sir. He judged them. Garp put the rice cracker down. The boy in the straw hat was probably his idiot grandson, which was a headache for another day. But this other figure, this was different. This power didn't fit the known categories of devil fruits or hockey. It was something else, something abnormal. He stood and walked to a secure communications locker. He pulled out a pitch-black Den Mushi, one that connected to a line very few people in the world even knew existed. He picked up the receiver. "It's Garp," he said, his voice now devoid of its usual joviality. "We have a situation in the East Blue." The voice that replied from the snail was cold, ancient, and devoid of emotion. "Specify." "We have a potential anomaly," Garp stated. "Class A power signature. Psychological and reality-altering capabilities reported. Total pacification of a high-level threat with extreme prejudice and zero collateral damage to civilians. This one is different." There was a long pause on the other end. "Understood," the voice finally said. "The Aegis will be notified. We will monitor the situation." The line went dead. Garp placed the receiver back, his face grim. A storm god in the East Blue. He had a very bad feeling that the world was about to become a much more dangerous place. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Scholar of the Sands. The sea was a different beast in the Grand Line. The currents were schizophrenic, the weather a mad god's whim. Islands of summer sat spitting distance from islands of perpetual winter. Navigating it was less a science and more a conversation with chaos. For Nami, it was the ultimate challenge, and she had never felt more alive. For Arashi, it was simply loud. Their vessel, the Dawnbreaker, was Nami's masterpiece. It was a caravel, sleek and swift, but modified to Arashi's specifications. The keel and main mast were carved from a single, impossibly dense ironwood tree from Arashi's birth island, which he had personally infused with his energy. The ship was unnaturally durable, an extension of his own dominion of the flesh. It cut through the waves with an ease that defied physics, a silent testament to the power that propelled it. Nami stood at the helm, a map spread across a large table bolted to the deck, held down by polished stones. Her hair, longer now, was tied back in a high ponytail, whipping in the salty wind. She was a whirlwind of focused energy, barking orders at a pair of Arashi's manifest. Will clones who handled the rigging with silent, perfect efficiency. "Port 10 degrees, she commanded. "There's a rogue whirlpool forming off the starboard bow. It's not on any chart, the greedy liar. In Logatown charged me a fortune for this." Arashi leaned against the mast, arms crossed, watching her. In the months since Kokoyashi, a comfortable rhythm had developed between them. She was the mind, the strategist, the one who saw the path. He was the force, the engine, the one who cleared it. He had procured their initial funding by liberating it from a notoriously cruel slave trader's vault in Logatown. An act Nami had applauded with a grin that was both parts righteous and avaricious. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked, not looking away from the churning water. He nodded. He did. "NT need a map to feel the sickness of their destination." "It's thirsty," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The land itself is crying out." His dominion of the world had been a constant, low thrum of anguish for the past week, growing louder as they followed the log pose to the desert kingdom of Alabasta. It was a feeling of pervasive, agonizing dryness, of a million souls parched with thirst and burning with impotent rage. It was a nation on the brink of tearing itself apart. "Civil war," Nami said, tapping the map. "The king, Nefertari Cobra, is based in the capital, Alubarna. The rebel army, led by a man named Koza, is gathering near a port town called Nanohana. The official story is a prolonged drought, but the rebels blame the king and a government-sponsored substance called dance powder for stealing the rain. But the king isn't the cause," Arashi stated. It wasn't a question. He could feel the threads of this conflict, the tangled web of lies and manipulation. The king's life force was strained, racked with worry. But it was honest. The rebels' rage was righteous, but misdirected. The true source of the nation's pain was a third party, a hidden cancer that festered in the shadows, its aura a cold, calculated cruelty. My thoughts exactly, Nami agreed. Someone is playing both sides, profiting from the chaos. If a nation falls, there's a power vacuum. And vacuums get filled by the worst kinds of people. We need to know who. They made port at Nanohana under the cover of a sandstorm that Arashi subtly encouraged, his will nudging the winds to give them cover. The town was a tinderbox of tension. Royal guards stood nervously on one side of the street while men with the sun-scorched faces of rebels watched them from the other, hands resting on the hilts of their swords. The air was thick with dust and suspicion. Arashi and Nami, dressed in local garb to blend in, separated to gather information. Nami, with her uncanny ability to charm and disarm, headed for a tavern known to be a rebel sympathizer hotspot. Arashi walked the streets, his senses wide open. He let the emotional currents of the city wash over him, filtering the noise, searching for the source of the rot. He felt the brash, idiotic confidence of the Straw Hat Pirates as they blundered through the city, drawing attention to themselves. He felt the desperation of the shopkeepers, the fear of the children. And then he felt it. A void. It was a stark contrast to the burning emotions all around him. It was a pocket of absolute zero, a black hole in the fabric of life. It was a consciousness that felt no joy, no anger, no hope. Only a quiet, detached, and soul-deep weariness. It was the aura of someone who had died long ago but had forgotten to let their body fall. Intrigued, he followed this chilling emptiness to a lavishly decorated casino on the edge of town, a place called Rain Dinners. He entered, the gaudy opulence a stark insult to the starving people outside. He saw her immediately, a tall, elegant woman with black hair and eyes that held an ancient sadness. She wore a cowboy hat and a revealing leather outfit, a professional smile plastered on her face that didn't come close to reaching her eyes. A nameplate identified her as Miss All Sunday, the partner of the casino's owner, Mr. Crocodile. Arashi watched her from across the room. He saw the way she moved, with a languid grace that bespoke immense power held in careful reserve. He saw the way she handled the boorish patrons, her smile never wavering, her eyes never seeing. She wasn't here. She was a million miles away. Adrift in a sea of forgotten history and personal tragedy. He could feel the brand on her soul, the psychic scar of a world that had declared her very existence a crime. The demon of Ohara, he whispers of the bounty hunters he'd overheard in Logatown clicked into place. Nico Robin. He didn't approach her aggressively. He simply walked to the bar, ordered a glass of water, and stood near her, letting his own presence be known. He didn't mask his power, but he didn't project it either. He was just there. A calm, solid point in her swirling void. She noticed him, of course. Her detached gaze flickered toward him. A flicker of professional curiosity that was instantly replaced by something else. A faint, almost imperceptible confusion. Arashi's life force was unlike anything she had ever encountered. It wasn't the boisterous energy of a fighter or the dim flicker of a civilian. It was like standing next to a star, calm, constant, and overwhelmingly potent. He turned his head and met her eyes. His were a startling, oceanic blue, and they saw her. Not Miss All Sunday, the beautiful second in command. Not the demon of Ohara, the fugitive. They saw the tired woman beneath it all. You seem out of place here, he said. His voice quiet enough that only she could hear. Her professional smile tightened. I'm not sure what you mean, sir. I am the vice president of this establishment. No, he said, shaking his head slowly. I mean you seem out of place in the world. As if you're just waiting for it to end. The smile vanished. For the first time, a genuine emotion surfaced in her eyes. Shock. Followed by a sliver of fear. No one had ever spoken to her like that. People feared her, desired her, or wanted to use her. No one had ever simply seen her. You don't know anything about me, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, low tone. I know you're empty, Arashi replied, his gaze unwavering and full of a strange, unnerving empathy. You orchestrate this nation's downfall. You watch people suffer and die, and you feel nothing. Not because you're cruel, but because you don't believe anyone's life, including your own, has any value. He took a sip of his water. So my question is this, he said, setting the glass down. In a world you believe has no meaning, what is it you truly want, Nico Robin? Before she could process the shock of him knowing her true name. A commotion erupted at the entrance. The Straw Hats had arrived, and with them, a furious Marine Captain Smoker. The ensuing chaos was the perfect cover. Robin vanished in the confusion, her mind reeling. He hadn't threatened her. He hadn't tried to capture her. He had diagnosed her soul with the calm certainty of a master physician, and it scared her more than any buster call. Arashi slipped out, his first objective complete. He had planted a seed of doubt in the enemy's most crucial player. He rendezvoused with Nami in their hidden safe house, a small, abandoned storeroom. She had her maps and charts spread out, along with scraps of paper filled with her elegant handwriting. "It's a criminal syndicate," she said, her voice tight with anger. "They call themselves Baroque Works. Millions of agents, all with code names. The leader is one of the 7 warlords of the sea, Crocodile. He's the owner of that casino, Mr. Zero. His goal is to destabilize the country, frame the king, and present himself as the nation's savior. Once he's in power, he gets free rein to search for his real prize." The poneglyph, Arashi finished, the word coming to him from the whispers of the land. "He's arching for the location of an ancient weapon, Pluton." Nami stared at him. "How could you possibly know that?" "The land remembers," he said simply. "And the woman from the casino, Nico Robin. She's the only one in the world who can read them. That's why he needs her." Nami processed this, her mind racing. "So we have a warlord manipulating a civil war to find an ancient superweapon, and the only person who can help him is a woman with a 79 million berry bounty who wants the world to burn." She let out a long, frustrated sigh. "This is so much more complicated than fish men." "The objective is the same," Arashi said. "Protect the innocent. Remove the rot." "And how do we do that?" Nami challenged. "We can't fight a whole syndicate and a warlord by ourselves." "We don't have to fight them all," Arashi said, a plan forming in his mind. "We just have to cut the head off the snake. But we do it our way. Not with a reckless charge." Over the next few days, they became ghosts. While the Straw Hats and Princess Vivi raced across the desert, Arashi and Nami waged a shadow war. Nami, using the intel she'd gathered, identified key Baroque Works supply lines and communication hubs. Arashi then dispatched clones. A storehouse of weapons meant for the rebels would mysteriously collapse. An officer carrying battle plans would suddenly find himself lost in a sandstorm for 12 hours, long after his information was useless. Key agents would be found unconscious in alleyways, their pockets empty and their minds wiped of the last few hours, left with only a lingering sense of existential dread. They weren't stopping the war, not yet. They were shaping it, controlling the flow of information and resources, crippling Crocodile's organization from the inside out while remaining completely invisible. Arashi acted as a silent guardian, his dominion of the world allowing him to sense flare-ups of violence. A clone would appear, disarm a skirmish between rebels and royal guards before it could escalate, and vanish, leaving both sides confused and alive. He was saving lives one small intervention at a time, a guardian angel the country didn't even know it had. The climax arrived, as they knew it would, in Alubarna. Crocodile's plan was in its final, brutal stage. While Luffy confronted the warlord beneath the city, a massive bomb was ticking down in the central clock tower. Powerful enough to wipe out the Royal Plaza and everyone in it, rebel and royalist alike. The Straw Hats were scattered, desperately trying to find the bomb's location. Arashi didn't need to search. He stood on a high rooftop with Nami. His eyes closed. He could feel it. The cold, mechanical heartbeat of the timer. The volatile, unstable energy packed within the cannon shell. And the rising, sting wave of panic from the thousands of people gathered below, completely unaware of their impending doom. "It's in the clock tower," he said, his eyes snapping open. "And they won't reach it in time." "What are you going to do?" Nami asked, her knuckles white as she gripped a railing. She had seen his power, but this was a bomb designed to kill an army. "Luffy can have the warlord," Arashi said. "I'll take the bomb." He leapt from the roof, his body a blur. He didn't run up the side of the tower. He simply jumped, his feet finding impossible purchase on the sheer stone face, propelling himself upward in a gravity-defying ascent. He reached the belfry just as Pell, the noble guardian of Alabasta, transformed into his falcon form and seized the massive bomb, intending to fly it into the sky and sacrifice himself. Your life has more value than that, Arashi's voice cut through the wind. He appeared in front of the falcon, hovering in midair, his feet resting on nothing. He placed a hand on the cannon shell. Hell stared in shock, his falcon eyes wide. Go, Arashi commanded. Protect your princess. He didn't wait for an answer. He pushed off from the bomb, sending Pell and the weapon away from the tower. Then placed his hands on the clock face itself. He closed his eyes and reached inward, pulling on the deepest reserves of his power. Manifest will. Sage's Aegis. A dome of pure, solid gold energy erupted from him, expanding with impossible speed. It grew, shimmering like a heat haze, until it completely enveloped the central plaza, a translucent, perfect hemisphere of light covering the city square like a glass bowl. Down below, the people looked up in terror and awe. The fighting stopped. Rebel and royalist alike stared at the impossible golden sky that had just appeared above them. High above the dome, Pell, forced away by Arashi's push, watched in horror as the bomb's fuse ran out. The explosion was immense. A blinding flash of white light, a fireball that hold have incinerated a quarter of the city. But it all happened in dead silence. The fireball slammed into the sky, but not into Arashi's dome. Arashi had already left the tower. He was at the epicenter of the blast, floating in the heart of the inferno. He wasn't blocking the explosion. He was unmaking it. He held his hands out, his dominion of the flesh glowing so brightly it outshone the fireball. The disruptive quality of his power went into overdrive. He wasn't just containing the force, he was attacking the very nature of the explosion. The chemical reaction was violently interrupted. The concussive force was unraveled into harmless waves of pressure. The shrapnel, inches from his face, lost its kinetic energy and turned to dust. From the ground, it looked as if the heart of the sun had bloomed in the sky for a second. Then, instead of expanding, it simply dissolved. It imploded into a single point of light on Arashi's palm and vanished, leaving behind nothing but a lingering warmth and the smell of ozone. He floated there for a moment, the sky clear above him, the golden dome over the plaza still holding firm. Then, with a sigh, he let it dissipate, dissolving into a show of harmless golden particles that drifted down onto the stunned crowd below. He had saved them all, and not a single one of them knew his name. His work wasn't done. His senses immediately shot downward, beneath the plaza, to the royal tomb. He felt Luffy's fading life force, poisoned and broken. He felt Crocodile's smug triumph. And he felt Robin's quiet, final resignation. He could feel her giving up, deciding to be buried alive in the collapsing tomb, her purpose served, her life forfeit. He dropped from the sky like a stone, landing silently behind the collapsing entrance to the tomb Ju. Saint as the last of the straw hats cleared the area. He didn't hesitate, phasing through the falling rock and rubble as if it were smoke. He found her in the darkness, the poneglyph room crumbling around them. She wasn't panicking. She was just standing there, a small, sad smile on her face, waiting for the stones to crush her. I thought we discussed this, Arashi's voice came from the shadows. Your life has value. Robin spun around, her eyes wide with disbelief. How? It doesn't matter, he said, stepping forward. A huge slab of the ceiling broke free, plummeting toward them. Arashi simply raised a hand, and the slab vaporized into sand and dust before it could reach them, his disruptive power dissolving it. He ignored her shock and scooped her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. What are you doing? She protested weakly, her ingrained instinct to betray and flee warring with a paralyzing sense of shock. I am refusing to let you commit suicide, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Luffy beat Crocodile. He gave you a chance to live. I'm going to make sure you take it. He held her tightly as he walked back through the collapsing corridor, the tomb trying and failing to bury them. Rocks turned to dust, a path clearing before him as if the very stone was afraid of him. He stepped out into the sunlight, carrying the world's most wanted criminal, and set her gently on her feet. Your deal with Crocodile is over, he said, looking down at her. Her composure was shattered, her face a mask of confusion and a terrifying, unfamiliar emotion, hope. You are bound to no one. You are free to go wherever you wish. He looked her in the eye, his gaze piercing. But I'm telling you now, your journey is not over. The truth you're seeking, the history of the Void Century, it's not a crime. It's a birthright, your birthright. Don't let the men who fear that truth convince you to die for their convenience. He paused, his voice softening slightly. Live, Nico Robin, live, and find a real reason. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the sun, the echoes of his words rewriting 20 years of conditioning. Live. It was a command she suddenly, desperately wanted to obey. 2 days later, the Dawnbreaker was anchored in a secluded cove several miles from Alubarna. The country was celebrating. Princess Vivi was safe. The rain had returned. Nami was counting the small fortune she'd appropriated from Baroque works, coffers, a happy hum on her lips. Arashi was meditating on the deck, feeling the life of Alabasta slowly, tentatively beginning to heal. That's when the temperature plummeted. The water around the ship began to freeze. A path of ice shot across the ocean from the horizon, and a tall, lanky figure casually pedaled toward them on a bicycle. Admiral Aokiji. Well now, this is troublesome, the Admiral said, his voice a lazy drawl as he stepped off his bike onto the frozen sea. I came looking for Nico Robin, and I find a ship that reeks of an anomaly. 2 bounties for the price of 1. Nami was instantly on her feet, her klima tacked in hand. Arashi opened his eyes, a dangerous light in them. On the shore, hidden among the rocks, Nico Robin watched, her heart hammering in her chest. She had been tracking the Dawnbreaker, unsure of what to do, what to think. Now, an admiral was here. Her past had caught up to her, as it always did. The cycle of betrayal and escape was about to begin again. Nico Robin, Aokiji called out, ignoring Arashi for a moment. You've caused a lot of trouble. You abandoned Crocodile. That breaks the deal. I think it's time your journey came to an end. He started to raise a hand, frost gathering around his fingers. No. The word was quiet, but it hit with the force of a thunderclap. Arashi stood up, and the air around the Dawnbreaker began to shimmer. A visible aura of gold, the color of a vibrant sunrise, began to radiate from him. The frost that was creeping up the hull of the ship didn't just melt. It sublimated. The encroaching ice didn't just stop, it receded, as if terrified. The withered desert plants on the nearby shore, touched by Aokiji's chill, began to uncurl. Small, defiant flowers bloomed in the sand where Arashi's aura touched them. It was a direct, conceptual battle. Aokiji's power was the cold, unfeeling stasis of absolute zero. Arashi's was the vibrant, chaotic, and undeniable energy of life itself. Aokiji lowered his hand, a genuinely surprised look on his sleepy face. What is this? That's not hockey. She is under my protection, Arashi announced, his voice echoing with power. He took a step forward, planting his foot on the ship's railing. The golden aura intensified, pushing the cold back, creating a visible 50-foot bubble of warmth and life around the ship. Your justice has no claim on her here. Leave. Aokiji stared at him, his lazy demeanor gone, replaced by the sharp focus of one of the world government's strongest fighters. He could feel it. This man's power wasn't just negating his ice. It was fundamentally opposed to it. To freeze him would be like trying to freeze the sun. It was possible, perhaps, but the effort required would be astronomical. And for what? A troublesome archaeologist. You're picking a fight with the entire world government for her, Aokiji stated, testing him. The world government pick a fight with her when they burned her home and called an 8-year-old girl a demon, Arashi countered, his voice cold as ice. I'm just ending it. From the shore, Robin watched, tears welling in her eyes. All her life, she had been a burden, a curse, a tool to be used and discarded. She had betrayed everyone who had ever shown her an ounce of kindness, convinced it was the only way to survive. But this man, he wasn't just offering her shelter. He was standing against a force of nature for her. For her, he wasn't afraid of her, or the world that hunted her. Aokiji was silent for a long time. This is very troublesome, he said finally, a strange, almost amused look on his face. He turned, got back on his bicycle. You've made a powerful enemy today, Anomaly. He gave a lazy wave without looking back. Try not to get destroyed before things get interesting. He pedaled away, the path of ice melting behind him. The unnatural cold vanished, replaced by the warm desert sun. Silence descended. Nami let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. You just stared down a Marine Admiral. Arashi's aura faded. He looked to the shore, his eyes meeting Robin's. He didn't say a word. He just held her gaze, offering the same silent invitation. Later that evening, as the twin moons rose, a small skiff rowed out to the dawnbreaker. Nico Robin climbed the rope ladder, her movements still elegant, but without the weary detachment. She stood on the deck before Arashi and Nami. The world government will never stop hunting me, she said, her voice steady. To be my ally is to make them your enemy. They were already my enemy, Arashi said. I just hadn't been formally introduced. Nami sighed, already calculating the increased cost of supplies and bribes. A 79 million berry bounty. That's going to attract a lot of attention. We'll need a bigger ship. And more guns. But there was no real venom in her words. She looked at Robin, seeing not a liability, but an asset. Whoa. Man who could read a history the world wanted to forget. For a girl who wanted to map the world, that was an irresistible treasure. Robin gave a small, genuine smile. It was a hesitant, fragile thing, but it was real. And it transformed her face. I am an archaeologist. My dream is to learn the true history of the Void Century. A history that, I suspect, you have a vested interest in changing the future of. She looked at Arashi. You told me to live and find a reason. I think my reason might be with you. She bowed her head slightly. If you'll have me, I would like to join your crew. Arashi simply nodded. Welcome aboard, Robin. It was as simple as that. No grand pronouncements, just an acceptance. For Nico Robin, it was everything. She had found a place where her knowledge wasn't a sin, and her life had value. She had found her reason. The report that landed on the desk of the 5 elders was flagged with the highest possible urgency. It was a detailed, personal account from Admiral Aokiji. It didn't just describe a fight. It described a philosophical confrontation. It spoke of a man whose power was the very antithesis of stasis and death, a being of pure, generative life force. It spoke of him nullifying a Logia's power not with superior haki, but by changing the very environment to be hostile to the element itself. The word, anomaly, was circled in red ink. The recommendation was clear. Immediate escalation. Threat level exceeds warlord class. Potential for global ideological insurgency. In a sterile, white room deep within the holy land of Mary Geois, a man named Silas read the report on a flickering screen. His face was sharp and intelligent, his eyes a cold, analytical gray. He wore the immaculate uniform of the Aegis. A generative life force entity, Silas murmured to himself. His fingers tapping on his console. Psychological influence confirmed at Kokoyasi. Reality-altering properties confirmed at Alabasta. Now confirmed to possess conceptual opposition to Logia-class abilities. He brought up another file. Nico Robin. Ohara. The Buster Call. The Poneglyphs. The anomaly has acquired the key, he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. It is no longer a passive threat. It is now an active agent of historical revisionism. He stood and walked to a map of the world projected on the wall. He tapped a cluster of islands burned off most official charts. The ruins of Ohara. To understand the weapon, Silas said to the empty room, one must first understand the hand that wields it. He keyed in a command. Activate Unit 7. Prepare transport to the West Blue. Objective. Archaeological survey of Ohara. I will lead the team personally. The hunt had begun. Silas was not a man who fought battles. He dissected them, and he was about to begin his dissection of Arashi. Starting with the ashes of Nico Robin's home. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Empress of the Calm Belt. The Dawnbreaker cut a silent, swift path through the Grand Line's chaotic waters. On deck, the atmosphere was one of quiet, focused purpose. Nico Robin sat in a shaded chair, a thick, leather-bound book in her lap, cross-referencing one of Nami's newly acquired charts. Her presence had brought a scholarly calm to the crew, a deep well of knowledge that complemented Nami's sharp, practical intelligence. The next archipelago is Sabayati, Robin announced, her voice as smooth and unhurried as the turn of a page. It's not technically an island. It's a collection of 79 giant mangrove trees, the Urukiman mangrove. The roots don't sink, so it's not registered by a log pose. We're navigating by the sap's unique scent. Nami, perched in the crow's nest with a high-powered spyglass, wrinkled her nose. "It smells like a candy store exploded. It's giving me a headache." She slid down a rope with practiced ease, landing lightly on the deck. "More importantly, what's the danger level?" "Last I heard, it's a lawless pit stop before the New World. A gathering place for the worst of the worst." "That's the tourist brochure version," Robin said with a dry smile. "The reality is more complex. It's lawless, yes, but it exists under the direct shadow of the world government's headquarters. Mary Geoy's Marine headquarters is also nearby. It's a place of contradictions. Pirates gather freely, but so do the celestial dragons." The name fell into the conversation with the weight of a tombstone. Arashi, who had been standing at the prow, his eyes closed as he felt the strange, bubbling life force of the approaching mangroves, turned his head. He had heard the name from Robin before. A whisper of absolute, unquestioned authority. "The world nobles," Nami spat, the name tasting like poison. "The descendants of the creators. They can do whatever they want, and no one can touch them. If you so much as obstruct their path, an admiral can be summoned," Robin confirmed, her face grim. "They are the untouchable gods of this world. And Sabayati is their playground. So, the plan is simple," Arashi said, his voice cutting through the tension. "We get the ship coded for the journey to Fishman Island. We gather supplies and information. And we do not, under any circumstances, interact with a celestial dragon." Nami and Robin exchanged a look. It was a solid plan. It was also, they both knew, doomed to fail. Trouble didn't just find Arashi, it seemed to gravitate toward his very existence, drawn in by the sheer force of his will. Sabayati was a sight to behold. Giant, city-sized trees soared into the sky, their branches interlinking to form a canopy that dappled the world below in a strange, greenish light. Massive bubbles floated up from the ground, lifting people, carriages, and even small buildings into the air. The place was a chaotic, vibrant circus of pirates, bounty hunters, merchants, and marines, all buzzing with a nervous energy. The air was thick with the scent of resin and the tang of impending violence. Nami's first task was to find a coding mechanic, a notoriously difficult and expensive endeavor. Robin suggested they start their search for information at the less savory establishments. The human auctioning house on Grove 1 is a nexus of underworld activity. She said, her tone clinical. "We won't be buying, of course. But the people who gather there often speak more freely. We might learn which of the emperors are making moves in the New World." Arashi felt a knot of revulsion tighten in his stomach. Slavery. Of all the world's evils, it was the one he found most repulsive, the ultimate expression of one person's will crushing another's. But Robin was right. Information was their most valuable currency. "We go in, we listen, we leave," he said, his voice flat. He created a single, unobtrusive clone and sent it with Nami to find the coding artisan, Rayleigh, whom Robin had mentioned by reputation. He and Robin, cloaked and hooded, would brave the auction house. The auction house was even more grotesque than he had imagined. It was a theater of human misery disguised in velvet and gold. The wealthy and depraved sat in plush seats, bidding on pirates, revolutionaries, and exotic races with the same casual air as one might bid on livestock. Arashi's dominion of the world was a cacophony of terror, a silent scream of despair from the cages below the stage. He had to actively shield himself from it, lest the sheer volume of pain drive him to level the building. Robin placed a steadying hand on his arm. "Keep your focus," she murmured, her own face a pale, stoic mask. She had seen this world her entire life. For him, the rawness of it was still a fresh wound. Then, they entered. The celestial dragons, Saint Charlos and his sister, Saint Shalria, moved through the crowd like a disease. The air parted before them. Everyone, from the most feared pirate captain to the wealthiest merchant, dropped to their knees, heads bowed. To remain standing was a death sentence. Arashi and Robin knelt with the rest. Though it felt like swallowing glass. Arashi watched from under his hood as Charlos, a man with a perpetually vacant expression and a bubble helmet over his ridiculous hairstyle, bumped into a man who wasn't fast enough to get out of his way. Without a word, Charlos drew a golden pistol and shot the man in the back. The man convulsed on the floor, bleeding out, and no one moved a muscle to help him. Charlos simply walked on, annoyed that his path had been momentarily blocked. Arashi's entire body went rigid. The power in him, the sage's dominion, which usually flowed like a calm river, began to churn like a violent sea. He could feel the life draining from the man on the floor, his terror and confusion a final, sputtering flare. Robin's grip on his arm tightened. Not here, her eyes pleaded. Not now. He took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing the storm inside him back down. He was not an impulsive child. He was a force of change, and change required precision, not just rage. The auction began. After a few pitiful sales, the main event was wheeled onto the stage. A mermaid, Kami, trapped in a water-filled tank, her eyes wide with terror. A wave of lust and greed washed through the audience. Saint Charlos, his face lighting up with a childish, possessive glee, immediately bid 500 million berry, an amount so astronomical it silenced the entire room. It was a declaration that she was his property. It was in that moment of silent, collective acceptance of this atrocity that the Straw Hats, who had been hiding in the back, made their move. The octopus fish man, Hachi, who had survived Arlong Park, tried to stop them, revealing himself in the process. Saint Charlos, angry that a disgusting fish man was breathing the same air as him, shot him. That was the spark. The boy in the straw hat, Luffy, who had been holding his rage in check, saw his friend shot. And he walked, with deliberate, furious steps, right toward the celestial dragon. The world seemed to hold its breath. Robin tensed, ready to use her powers to create a diversion for their own escape. But Arashi didn't move. He watched Luffy, a flicker of grim approval in his eyes. The boy had heart. Luffy's punch was a thing of raw, satisfying justice. It sent Saint Charlos flying, his bubble helmet shattering, his body crashing into a bench with a sickening crunch. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then, pandemonium. An admiral is coming. Everyone run. The crowd erupted, a frantic stampede for the exits. This was their chance to disappear. But as they turned to leave, Arashi saw Saint Shalria, her face contorted in a mask of rage, raise a pistol and aim it at the mermaid's tank. If she couldn't have the prize, she would destroy it. Arashi moved. He wasn't a blur of speed. He simply wasn't there one moment and was in front of her the next. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak. He just looked at her. And he unleashed the dominion of the soul. It was not the karmic overload he had used on the marine captain. It was something far more precise. He didn't show her the pain she had caused. He showed her the pain she would feel. He projected a single, vivid, and absolute psychic truth into her mind, the image of her. Stripped of her title, her wealth, her protection. He made her feel the terror of being a slave on that very stage, the leering eyes of the crowd on her, her life being sold to the highest bidder. He made her experience the absolute loss of the privilege that defined her entire existence. He showed her what it felt like to be nothing. Saint Shalria froze, her finger on the trigger. Her eyes, visible through her helmet, went wide with a horror that had nothing to do with physical threats. A low, guttural moan escaped her lips. The pistol fell from her nerveless fingers. She sank to her knees. Her mind locked in a feedback loop of existential terror, weeping for a fate that had only happened in her own soul. Arashi turned away from her, his face a mask of cold fury. He walked over to the catatonic Saint Charlos. Luffy had broken his face. Arashi would break his spirit. He knelt, placing a single finger on the unconscious noble's forehead. He did the same to him as he had his sister, but amplified it 1,000-fold. He didn't just show him the pain of one slave. He connected Charlos's mind to the genetic memory of suffering that flowed through the veins of the world noble's victims for 800 years. He made him feel every whip, every chain, every moment of despair, every life crushed under the heel of his family's divine right. It was a tidal wave of ancestral agony. Saint Charlos's body began to convulse on the floor, foam spewing from his lips. His eyes, though closed, darted back and forth as his mind was comprehensively and irrevocably shocked by a truth it was never designed to comprehend. "What did you do?" Robin whispered, coming to his side. She could feel the psychic residue in the air, a terrifying symphony of silent screams. Quote, "I gave them a taste of their own medicine," Arashi said, his voice dangerously quiet. Justice isn't always about a punch. Sometimes, it's about understanding. Outside, the building was surrounded. Marines swarmed the grove, and then, a brilliant flash of yellow light, followed by an explosion that vaporized a corner of the auction house. Admiral Kizaru had arrived. Ooh, scary, the Admiral's lazy voice echoed. To strike a celestial dragon, that's a very, very bad crime. Beams of pure light shot from his fingers, causing pirates to scatter like insects. Time to go, Arashi said, grabbing Robin's hand. They moved, not toward the exits, but deeper into the chaos. The Straw Hats were already engaged in a frantic battle with the Marines. Arashi's goal was escape, not a protracted war. Nami, he projected with his will. A telepathic shout. Grove 24. Get to the ship, we're coming. He felt a flash of panicked acknowledgement from her and his clone. They were on their way. Kizaru spotted them, his gaze lingering on Robin. Nico Robin. And you, he said, tilting his head at Arashi. You have the same troublesome look as the man in Aokiji's report. A light speed kick materialized, aimed at Robin's head. Arashi moved, placing himself in its path. He brought his arm up, coated in the obsidian sheen of his dominion of the flesh. The impact was deafening. Arashi's feet dug trenches in the ground, and the air around his arm sizzled and hissed, but he held. He had blocked a blow that moved at the speed of light. Kizaru's eyebrows raised a fraction. Ooh, strong. But can you block this? He dissolved into a shower of light particles, reappearing behind them. Before he could strike, 3 of Arashi's clones flickered into existence, launching themselves at the Admiral. Kizaru dispatched them with casual ease, their solid forms exploding into harmless energy, but it bought Arashi the precious seconds he needed. He grabbed Robin and leapt, clearing half a grove in a single bound. It was a frantic, desperate chase across the giant roots of Sabayati. Kizaru was relentless, a predator toying with his prey, his light beams hurting them. Robin used her Hana no Mi powers, sprouting limbs to create temporary shields or to change their trajectory midair. It was a beautiful, chaotic dance of survival. They were cornered at the edge of Grove 13. Kizaru stood before them, a finger glowing. Time's up. And then, he appeared, a giant of a man in a dark coat, holding a Bible. Bartholomew Kuma, the tyrant, another warlord. Kuma ignored Kizaru. He ignored the Straw Hats battling a pacifista nearby. His strange, cybernetic eyes fixed on Arashi. Arashi, he said, his voice a deep, monotone rumble. It wasn't a question. Arashi tensed. This man knew his name. And his presence felt different. Not hostile, calculating. The Revolutionary Army has taken an interest in you, Kuma said, his voice too low for Kizaru to hear over the din. Dragon sees the storm you are creating. He looked from Arashi to Robin, then at the chaos surrounding them. This is not your battlefield. Your path lies elsewhere. Your will requires a fortress. Your revolution requires an empress. Before Arashi could demand an explanation, Kuma took off his glove. Do not worry about your navigator. I have already sent her and your vessel to the same destination. He raised his palm. Consider this an investment in a potential future. He touched Arashi's chest. There was no impact, no pain. Just a profound sense of displacement. The world dissolved. The journey was instantaneous and eternal. A void of color and pressure. Then, light. Arashi landed hard on soft, loamy earth, Robin landing beside him a moment later. They were in a dense, humid jungle, filled with towering trees and strange, vibrant flowers. The air was thick and heavy, untouched by industry. Before they could even get their bearings, a volley of arrows rained down from the canopy. They weren't normal arrows. They were coated in a shimmering energy. The same principle as his own dominion of the flesh. Haki. Arashi reacted without thinking. He pulled Robin behind him and held up a hand. An invisible wall of force, his manifest will, stopped the arrows in midair, a foot from his face. They clattered harmlessly to the ground. Show yourselves, he called out, his voice calm but firm. Dozens of women dropped from the trees, surrounding them. They were tall, powerful, clad in tribal leathers and armed with bows and snakes that served as bowstrings. Their eyes were hard, their stances ready. They exuded a fierce, predatory confidence. Men, one of them hissed, on our sacred island, Kill them. Another volley flew. This time, Arashi didn't just block them. 2 clones flickered into existence, moving in a blur. They didn't harm the women. They simply disarmed them, plucking bows from their hands and spears from their grips with impossible speed and precision, leaving the warriors empty-handed and stunned. "We mean you no harm," Arashi said, holding up his empty hands. "We were sent here against our will. We are looking for our ship and our navigator." The lead warrior, a stern-faced woman with a lavender bob cut, stared at him, her suspicion warring with her disbelief. "No man can set foot on Amazon Lily and live. It is the law of the Kuja." Suddenly, the warriors all knelt, their heads bowed low. A palpable wave of authority, a potent form of the dominion of the soul, washed over the clearing. A massive, white serpent slithered into view, and perched atop its head was the most beautiful woman Arashi had ever seen. She was impossibly tall and graceful, with long, black hair and a face that could launch fleets and end wars. Her figure was divine, her bearing regal. But beneath the breathtaking beauty, Arashi's dominion of the world felt something else. A fortress of arrogance built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated terror. A deep, soul-scarring trauma that she papered over with a mask of contempt for the entire world. This was Boa Hancock, the pirate empress, warlord of the sea, and ruler of Amazon Lily. "You dare bring your filth to my island," she said, her voice dripping with disdain as she looked down her nose at him. "And you have brought another woman with you. How foolish." She struck a pose, leaning back so far it defied gravity, pointing a finger at him. "You should be captivated by my beauty, groveling for my forgiveness. But since you are a man, you are less than a bug. I will turn you to stone with my power, and your statue will serve as a warning to all others." She blew a kiss, from which a heart-shaped beam of pink light shot toward him. Marrow marrow mellow. The beam struck Arashi square in the chest. Robin cried out, expecting him to turn to stone. Nothing happened. Arashi just stood there, a vaguely curious expression on his face. The beam dissipated against his skin like harmless smoke. He wasn't immune because he had no impure thoughts. He was immune because his will, his very soul, was a fortress that her power could not find purchase on. It was like throwing a pebble at a supernova. Hancock's arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a look of utter shock. "What? Why aren't you turning to stone? You must be lusting after me. It always works." Arashi ignored her outburst. He was focused on the feeling he was getting from her, the psychic scar. It was a brand, a mark of ownership, burned not just into her flesh, but into her very soul. He could feel the shame and horror associated with it, a pain she relived every second of every day. And his next words were not aimed at the Empress, but at the wounded girl she was hiding. "That mark you carry," he said, his voice soft and laced with an empathy that cut through her defenses like a hot knife. "It must be a heavy burden to carry alone." The effect was more devastating than any physical attack. Hancock flinched as if he had struck her. Her eyes widened, her regal composure shattering into 1,000 pieces. The mask of the Empress fell away, revealing a flash of pure, terrified vulnerability. No one knew. No one could ever know. How did this man see it? What did you say?" She stammered, her voice losing its haughty edge. "Silence," she shrieked, recovering herself with a supreme act of will. Rage replaced her fear. "You know nothing. For your insolence, and for resisting my beauty, you will face the ultimate punishment. You will fight in the arena. To the death." They were thrown into a prison cell to await the trial. Robin looked at Arashi, her mind still reeling. "You are a magnet for the most powerful and unstable women in the world, aren't you?" Arashi just sighed. Apparently. Soon after, they were dragged into a massive coliseum carved from the island's rock. The stands were filled with thousands of Kuja warriors, all screaming for their blood. In the center of the arena, Hancock's 2 younger sisters, Sandersonia and Marigold, transformed into massive gorgon-like creatures. Their bodies part human, part snake. Hancock herself sat on a throne high above, her face a mask of cold fury, though Arashi could feel the terrified panic roiling beneath the surface. "Defeat my sisters, and you may live," Hancock declared, her voice echoing. "But if you lose, you die. And so will your companion." The 2 giant gorgons lunged. Arashi pushed Robin safely to the edge of the arena. "Stay here. I'll handle this. He had no intention of fighting them. He could end it in a second, but that would solve nothing. He needed to dismantle their belief system, not their bodies. Sandersonia spat venomous snakes at him. Arashi simply wove between them, his movements fluid and effortless. Marigold swung her massive tail, trying to crush him. He leapt over it, landing lightly as a feather. He was untouchable. Is this all? He asked, his voice calm. I have no quarrel with you. We are not your enemies. All men are our enemies. Sandersonia shrieked, her snake hair hissing. During the fight, a clumsy lunge from Marigold sent a chunk of the arena wall flying toward a group of Kuja spectators. Without hesitation, Arashi appeared in front of them, his back to the Gorgons, and shattered the incoming debris with a single, casual backhand. He hadn't even looked. The crowd gasped. He had protected them. Hancock watched from her throne, her heart pounding. He was toying with her sisters. He was powerful, impossibly so. And yet, he showed no malice. He was protecting her people. It was confusing. Finally, growing frustrated, Sandersonia used her power to wrap Arashi in her snake-like body, constricting him. I've got you now. Now, Marigold. As she squeezed, the back of her shirt was pulled up, revealing the skin of her lower back. And there it was, the same mark Arashi had sensed on Hancock. A brand, the hoof of the soaring dragon. The mark of a celestial dragon's slave. Sandersonia froze in horror, realizing her shame was exposed to her entire nation. The crowd began to murmur, confused. Arashi saw his chance. He could break free easily. Instead, he did something no one expected. He stopped resisting. And he spoke, his voice resonating with his dominion. Everyone, look away. It wasn't a request. It was a command filled with such authority that every single Kuja warrior, including Robin, instinctively turned their backs or covered their eyes. Then, with a gentle pulse of his disruptive energy, he forced Sandersonia's body to uncoil. He dropped to the ground, landing in front of her, his body shielding her exposed back from her sister and the throne. He looked up at Hancock, his blue eyes piercing. You don't have to live in fear of this, he said. A past of pain doesn't have to define your future. Hancock stared down at him, her entire world tilting on its axis. He had seen their ultimate shame, the source of all their fear and rage. And he had not mocked it. He had not used it against them. He had protected it. He had protected them. She tried to speak, but no words came out. He was immune to her power. He was stronger than her entire country. And he was kind. The combination was something her mind simply couldn't process. The fortress she had built around her heart for 2 decades began to crumble. Back at Sabayati, the auction house was a quarantine zone swarming with white-suited investigators. Silas, leader of the Aegis, stepped through the yellow tape, his gray eyes taking in the scene with detached, clinical interest. He ignored the bodies of pirates and the scorch marks from Kizaru's lasers. He walked directly to the chalk outlines of the 2 fallen celestial dragons. He knelt, not in reverence, but as a scientist examining a specimen. He ran a gloved hand over a device on his wrist, which hummed as it scanned the psychic residue in the air. His assistant, a stern-faced woman known only as Cypher, stood behind him. Report, Silas said, his eyes closed in concentration. Sir, the physical trauma to St. Charlos is consistent with a blunt force attack from the pirate, Monkey D. Luffy. However, the neurological state of both nobles is unprecedented. Silas opened his eyes, staring at the readings on his device. It's not a memory wipe. It's not psionic trauma. It's a forced empathy cascade. He stood up, a look of cold, intellectual fascination on his face. He didn't break their minds. He connected them to a conceptual truth so vast and absolute that their neural frameworks collapsed. He showed them the consequences of their own existence. Cypher looked disturbed. Sir, what does that mean? Silas turned, his gaze sweeping over the chaos of the grove. It means the anomaly's power is evolving. Marineford was a display of physical and strategic prowess. Alabasta was a demonstration of generative, reality-altering power. This, he gestured to the 2 comatose nobles being loaded onto a medical ship, this is ideological warfare in its purest form. He looked toward the sea, in the direction Kuma had sent Arashi. He doesn't just want to defeat us. He wants to change the very way we think. The threat is not to our fleets or our armies. It is to the fundamental concept of our authority. He tapped his comms unit. Raise the threat level. Target. Arashi. Classification. World-class existential threat. All assets are now authorized. Find him. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Declaration at Marineford. The throne room of the Kuja was thick with a tension that had not been felt in a generation. Arashi and Robin stood before the throne, not as prisoners, but as honored, and deeply unsettling, guests. Nami was there, having been safely deposited on the island with the Dawnbreaker by Kuma's mysterious power. She stood beside Arashi, her arms crossed, her eyes darting between him and the pirate empress, a silent calculation running in her mind. The three Gorgon sisters sat on cushions, their usual haughty demeanor replaced by a mixture of awe, confusion, and a hesitant gratitude. Boa Hancock sat on her throne, not looking at Arashi, but at a point on the wall just past his shoulder. The mask of the Empress was back in place, but it was a fragile thing now. Like a porcelain veneer over a cracked foundation. The events in the arena had shaken her to her very core. "You have proven your strength," she said, her voice formal and stiff. "And you have shown a strange sort of honor. The law of the Kuja is absolute. No man may leave this island alive. However," she trailed off, struggling with the words. For the first time in her life, the law felt insufficient. "However," Nami interjected smoothly, ever the pragmatist, "laws are for normal circumstances. This is clearly not one of them. You have a problem. We have a problem. Perhaps our problems can solve each other." Hancock's piercing gaze snapped to Nami. "And what problem do I have, little navigator?" "The world government," Nami stated simply. "They've summoned you to fight in the U.P. coming war against the Whitebeard pirates. If you refuse, they'll revoke your warlord status and your treaty, leaving Amazon Lily vulnerable. If you accept, you fight for the very people who branded you." She let the statement hang in the air, a perfectly aimed dart. The color drained from Hancock's face. Nami had hit the bullseye. "How do you know this?" Sandersonia hissed. "Kuma mentioned it before he sent us here," Robin supplied. Her voice calm. "He said this war would be a turning point for the world. A stage." All eyes turned to Arashi. He had been silent, letting his crew, his council, lay the groundwork. Now, he spoke. "The son of the pirate king, Portgas D. Ace, is set to be executed," he said. The statement was matter of fact, but it carried the weight of destiny. "Whitebeard will tear the world apart to save him. The Marines will meet him with their full force. It will be the largest conflict this world has seen in a generation. This has nothing to do with me." Hancock snapped, her voice betraying her rising panic. "Let them destroy each other. It has everything to do with you," Arashi countered, his blue eyes locking onto hers. He took a step forward, and the sheer force of his presence seemed to suck the air from the room. "You hide here, on this island, ruling your kingdom of fear, telling yourself you are strong. But you are a prisoner. You are a slave to the trauma inflicted on you by a celestial dragon, and you are a pawn in the games of the world government. Your freedom is an illusion they grant you as long as you are useful." Each word was a hammer ow against the walls she had built around herself. "You lie," she shrieked, jumping to her feet. "Do I?" Arashi's voice remained level, but it carried an undeniable authority. "Look at me, Boa Hancock. I am a man who is immune to your power. I am a man who saw your deepest shame and protected it. I am not your enemy. The men you are being forced to fight for, the men who wear the sigil of the world nobles, they are your enemies. They are the source of every nightmare you have ever had." He let that sink in. He could feel her inner turmoil, the war between her ingrained hatred of all men and the undeniable truth of his words. He wasn't trying to seduce her. He was trying to awaken her. "I am going to that war," Arashi declared, and the finality in his tone silenced all protest. "But I am not going to fight for Whitebeard or the Marines. I am going to use that stage to make a declaration to the world. I am going to show them that their system is broken. That their absolute justice is a lie. And I am going to declare myself the enemy of the gods who sit in merry geoys and pull the strings of this world." He looked directly at Hancock, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "I am offering you a choice. Not as a warlord, Not as a pawn, but as a queen. You can continue to hide here, praying the world forgets you exist. Or you can stand with me, and we can start building a world ere no one has to suffer what you did ever again. It was the ultimate gamble. He was offering her not just an alliance, but a purpose. A chance to turn her greatest pain into her greatest weapon. Hancock stood there, trembling. Her sisters watched her, their faces pale. Nami and Robin waited, holding their breath. This was the moment, the birth of a new power in the world, or a swift, stony end. Finally, with a shuddering breath, Hancock sank back onto her throne. Her eyes, for the first time, were not filled with contempt or fear, but with a dawning, terrifying resolve. You, she began, her voice barely a whisper. You are the first man who has ever spoken to me without lust or fear. You see everything. A single tear traced a path down her flawless cheek. If I help you, if I take you to Marineford, what do I get in return? Quote, you get your freedom, Arashi said simply. Your real freedom, and an empress will have her kingdom. But not one built on fear. One built on strength and will. A nation that will be a pillar in the new world we create. Hancock looked at him, truly looked at him, and what she saw was not a pirate, not a man, but a force of nature. A storm that had come not to destroy her, but to sweep away her prison. A slow, hesitant smile touched her lips. It was a smile of such dazzling, genuine beauty that it made her previous displays seem like cheap parlor tricks. Very well, Arashi, she said, her voice gaining a new, richer tone. I, the pirate empress Boa Hancock, will escort you to Marineford. Let the world tremble. The journey to Marineford was a surreal experience. Hancock, utterly infatuated, had insisted Arashi travel on her ship, hidden within her lavish personal quarters to maintain the ruse for the Marines. Arashi had agreed, but on the condition that Nami and Robin, aboard the cloaked Dawnbreaker, follow in their wake, guided by one of his clones. The Dawnbreaker was now a ghost ship, using a modified version of his disruptive energy. Arashi had taught Robin how to project a field around the hull that bent light and baffled sensory equipment, including basic observation hockey. It was a trick from his past life, elevated by his new power. They were an unseen dagger, poised to strike. On Hancock's ship, Arashi spent his time in a state of deep meditation. He was stretching his dominion of the world further than ever before, feeling the gathering storm. He could feel the Whitebeard pirates' fleet, a vast armada powered by a singular, familial love for their commander and their brother, Ace. It was a powerful, noble emotion. He could also feel Marineford, a fortress of steel and conviction. It was not evil, not entirely. It was a belief in order, a rigid, unyielding ideology of justice. And at its heart were three admirals, each a pillar of elemental power. And the stoic, mountainous presence of Fleet Admiral Sengoku and Vice Admiral Garp. He was a third party, a variable that none of their calculations could account for. As they passed through the gates of justice, the sheer scale of the assembled forces became clear. 100,000 of the Marines, elite soldiers. 50 allied pirate crews under Whitebeard's command. The remaining warlords. It was a meat grinder, a stage set for a tragedy of epic proportions. Hancock, playing her part, took her place alongside the other warlords. She exuded an aura of bored contempt, though Arashi could feel the frantic beating of her heart through their strange connection. He remained hidden, a silent passenger, waiting for his moment. The war began. Whitebeard arrived not by sea, but from beneath it, his coated ships surfacing in the middle of the bay, bypassing the cannons. The world's strongest man made his entrance, and the air itself seemed to tremble. The battle that followed was cataclysmic. Cannonballs, sword slashes, devil fruit powers, and hockey clashed in a chaotic symphony of destruction. Arashi watched it all from the shadows of Hancock's ship, his expression grim. He watched Luffy and his ragtag army of impelled-down escapees crash the party, adding another layer of chaos. He watched men die for their beliefs, pirates and marines alike. It was a tragic, pointless slaughter fueled by pride and grief. His moment came when the walls of the bay were raised, trapping the pirates inside for a planned annihilation by Akainu's magma meteors. The pirates panicked, their escape route cut off. Whitebeard stood firm, a colossus against the tide, but even he could not be everywhere at once. This was the nexus point. The moment of maximum despair. Now, Arashi murmured. He stepped out of the shadows and onto the deck of the Kuja ship. He took a single step, and then he was no longer there. He appeared in the dead center of the plaza, halfway between the execution platform and the raging battlefront. He had not run or jumped. He simply arrived. For a heartbeat, no one noticed him. Then, a few nearby fighters, marine and pirate alike, faltered. A man in simple, dark pants and a sleeveless top had materialized from thin air. He had no flag, no weapon, no affiliation. Sengoku, from his position on the platform, saw him. "Who is that?" he roared, his voice amplified. "Identify yourself." Arashi didn't answer. He simply closed his eyes, and the world seemed to hold its breath. A golden aura, the color of the purest dawn, erupted from him. It was not an attack. It was a declaration of presence. It washed over the entire battlefield, and every single person, from Whitebeard to the lowest-ranking Marine, felt it. It was not the oppressive, fear-inducing wave of Conqueror's Haki. It was a feeling of absolute, unshakable will. A calm certainty that silenced the rage and fear in their hearts for a brief, stunned moment. "My name is Arashi," he said. And though his voice was not loud, it carried to every corner of Marineford, as if he were whispering directly into each person's ear. "And I have come to end this farce." Then he acted. 12 clones of Manifest will flickered into existence around him. They were not flimsy shadow copies. They were solid, glowing with golden energy, each one a perfect replica of Arashi himself, radiating the same immense power. They moved as one. 2 clones appeared in front of the warlord Don Quixote da Flamingo, whose sadistic smile faltered for the first time. The clones didn't attack. They simply stood there, their presence a silent challenge, forcing the heavenly demon into a deadlock. Another clone intercepted a magma fist from Admiral Akainu aimed at a group of fleeing pirates. The clone's obsidian-coated arm met the magma, and while it sizzled and steamed, it did not yield. Akainu's eyes widened in fury and disbelief. Another clone appeared before Admiral Kizaru, its movements just as fluid and unpredictable as his light-speed attacks, mirroring him, containing him. A 5th clone engaged Admiral Aokiji, its aura of pure life energy creating a shimmering field that prevented his ice from spreading. 2 more clones blocked the path of the giant vice-admirals, their smaller forms holding their ground against the giant's massive weapons with impossible strength. The remaining 5 clones spread throughout the battlefield. They did not kill. They disarmed. They intercepted killing blows. They created barriers to shield groups of fighters from cannon fire. They were not fighting for a side. They were enforcing a stalemate, a battlefield-wide ceasefire through sheer overwhelming power. In the space of 30 seconds, the entire momentum of the war had ground to a halt. Every major player, from the admirals to Whitebeard's commanders, was suddenly occupied by a being of equal or greater power, forcing them into one-on-one standoffs. The grunts and captains looked on, their minds unable to comprehend what was happening. One man had just neutralized all the kings and queens on the board. Arashi himself took a slow, deliberate walk toward the execution platform. His path was clear. No one dared obstruct him. Vice Admiral Garp, his face a mask of thunderous fury, leapt from the platform to block his path. "I don't know who you are, boy, but you've gone too far. This is a war of justice." Arashi stopped before the legendary hero of the Marines. "Hello, Garp," he said, his tone respectful. "Justice. You call this justice? Executing a man for the crime of his birth. Forcing a war that will kill thousands to prove a point. This isn't justice. This is dogma. Enough talk." Garp roared, pulling his arm back for a punch that could shatter mountains. Arashi didn't flinch. He raised his own arm. His palm open. Their fists met. There was no earth-shattering shockwave. No explosion of haki. There was only a deep, resonant thrum. Garp's legendary punch, a force of nature, stopped dead against Arashi's palm. The ground beneath their feet fractured and cratered from the sheer focused energy, but neither of them moved an inch. Garp's eyes were wide with shock. His full power punch had been stopped cold by a man he'd never seen before. "Your fist carries the weight of your conviction," Arashi said, his voice calm amidst the silent battlefield. "It is strong. It is a conviction born of a flawed system. My will is my own." He pushed. It wasn't a violent shove. It was a gentle but irresistible pressure. Garp, the hero who had cornered the Pirate King, was forced back, step by step. His feet carving trenches in the stone. Arashi walked past him, continuing his slow ascent toward the platform where Sengoku stood beside a terrified Ace. Sengoku, seeing his oldest friend and rival pushed back, transformed. His body swelled to that of a giant golden Buddha, radiating an immense shockwave. You are an enemy of the world. You will be erased. A massive palm of pure golden energy descended, aimed at crushing Arashi. Arashi looked up at it, and for the first time, he smiled. He raised his own hand, palm up. A sphere of swirling, incandescent energy, more solid and more potent than any Rasengan he had ever formed, materialized above it. It was the color of a star, silent and perfect. He met Sengoku's giant shockwave palm with his own. The impact was silent. A sphere of absolute blackness. A perfect void appeared where the two attacks met, sucking in light, sound, and energy. The two ultimate expressions of will, one of order and one of freedom, cancelled each other out in a perfect, terrifying negation. When the void dissipated, Arashi was still standing there, unharmed. Sengoku was panting in his Buddha form, sweat beading on his brow. He had put everything into that attack, and it had done nothing. Arashi now stood on the platform. He looked at Ace, then at Sengoku. He ignored them both and turned to face the entire world. People of the world government. Pirates of the new age. His voice boomed, amplified by his will, a telepathic broadcast that reached every ship in the bay and every den mushi transmitting the event. Look at this pointless carnage. You are fighting and dying for the pride of old men and the decrees of cowards who hide in a holy city built on the bones of your ancestors. He pointed a finger at the execution platform. They want to execute this man, not for his crimes, but for the blood in his veins. This is the justice of your world government. A justice that fears potential, that stifles freedom, that perpetuates a cycle of hatred and revenge. He swept his arm across the battlefield, where his clones held the most powerful men in the world at bay. I am here to offer a new way. I am not a pirate who seeks treasure. I am not a marine who serves a corrupt master. I declare myself the enemy of the celestial dragons and the false gods they serve. I will build a nation where a person's worth is measured by their will, not their bloodline, where freedom is not a privilege, but a right. His speech was a lightning bolt to the soul of the world. He wasn't just a combatant, he was an ideologue, a revolutionary on the world's biggest stage. Luffy, he shouted, his voice now a sharp command. Your brother is yours to save. Go. His declaration had created the ultimate distraction. While all eyes were on him, Luffy, who had been struggling against a sea of vice admirals, found his path suddenly clear. Arashi's intervention had given him the one thing he needed, a straight shot. The rest was a blur. Luffy freed Ace. The pirates began their retreat. But tragedy, as it often does, struck at the moment of triumph. Akainu, his face a mask of molten fury at being held back by a mere clone, goaded Ace. The hot-headed commander turned back. And when Akainu moved to strike down a spent and vulnerable Luffy, Ace threw himself in the way. The magma fist plunged toward Ace's back. But it never connected. A figure appeared between them. Arashi. He had crossed the entire battlefield in an instant. He caught Akainu's magma fist in his bare hand. The hiss was deafening. Arashi's arm, coated in the deepest black of his dominion, steamed and glowed red at the point of contact. The pain must have been excruciating. But he did not yield. His grip tightened, and Akainu felt something impossible. His Logia body, his very essence of magma, was being disrupted. He couldn't flow. He was being held, solidified, by this man's sheer will. You have spilled enough blood today, Sakazuki, Arashi grunted, his voice tight with effort. He looked over his shoulder at the shocked Ace. Your brother gave you a second chance. Don't waste it. With a roar, he threw Akainu back, the admiral skidding across the plaza, leaving a trail of molten rock. Arashi stood before the two brothers, a shield of immovable will. Go, he commanded the retreating pirates. Live to fight another day. From the deck of her ship, Boa Hancock watched, her hand over her heart, tears streaming down her face. He was magnificent. He was everything he had promised to be. He had challenged the gods, faced down the admirals, and stood as a bulwark for freedom. Her infatuation had blossomed into something far deeper, far more profound. It was a worshipful, absolute devotion. The Dawnbreaker, still cloaked, moved into position. Nami, watching through her spyglass, her knuckles white, let out a shaky breath. He's insane. He's completely, brilliantly insane. Robin stood beside her, a rare, genuine smile on her face. He's not insane, Navigator-san. He is a king, and he just declared his coronation. As the pirates escaped and the war wound down into a confused, shocked aftermath, Arashi and his clones slowly faded back, melting into the shadows. Their purpose served. The world was left to grapple with what it had just witnessed. A new power had entered the game. Not an emperor, not a warlord. Something else entirely. A storm on the horizon. Ready to break. In the sterile white room in Mary Geoy's, Silas watched the broadcast end, the screen going dark. The room was filled with the silent, furious presence of his Aegis agents. All units, Silas said, his voice colder and flatter than ever before. Abort the search mission. We no longer need to find him. He turned to the tactical map of the world. He has declared his intent. He has demonstrated his power. He has planted the seeds of a global ideological rebellion. He zoomed in on the new world, the vast, unconquered sea where the emperors ruled. He will seek to build a base, a nation, a tangible symbol of his new world order. Our mission is no longer observation or capture. It is erasure. He looked at Cypher, his second in command. He has shown us his power. Now we will show him ours. We will hunt his allies. We will burn his resources. We will turn his followers against him. We will not fight his war. We will choke the life from High's revolution before it can even draw its first breath. A new file appeared on the screen, replacing the image of Arashi. It was a complex schematic for a new type of weapon, one that didn't rely on devil fruits or hockey. It was a weapon designed to attack the very concept of life force. The anomaly has a will, Silas stated, his gray eyes glinting in the pale light of the screen. It is time we howed him the power of a world with no will at all. Only order. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The King of the Forsaken. The aftermath of the War of the Best was a world holding its breath. The news of W.H. Eidberg's death and Arashi's declaration had spread like wildfire, carried by the wings of the news coup to every corner of the globe. Kings and commoners, pirates and revolutionaries alike, spoke his name in hushed, awed tones. Arashi, the storm, the man who had faced down the world government's strongest and walked away. He had no bounty, no official classification. To the world, he was a myth, an event, a question mark that had been burned onto the map. For the crew of the Dawnbreaker, the reality was far less mythical. They were fugitives of the highest order, sailing the treacherous waters of the New World. Their cloaked vessel was their only sanctuary, a ghost slipping between the territories of the furious and destabilized emperors. We can't keep running, Nami stated, her voice sharp with exhaustion. She stood over a massive chart spread across the main cabin table, which was littered with half-empty mugs of coffee. We're burning through supplies, and every island we get near is either allied with an emperor or swarming with marines and bounty hunters looking to make a name for themselves. We need a home, a base. Robin, perched on a stack of books in the corner, nodded in agreement. She is correct. A revolution cannot be waged from the deck of a single ship. An ideology needs a physical anchor, a place for its roots to take hold. Boa Hancock, who had left her Kuja warriors to guard Amazon Lily while she personally joined Arashi's inner circle, lounged on a divan, fanning herself. My island is always open to you, my love, she said, her voice a sultry purr directed solely at Arashi. My warriors would die for you. Arashi, who had been staring out of a porthole at the endless, churning sea, turned to face them. No, he said, his voice firm but gentle. Amazon Lily is your fortress, Hancock. It must remain a sanctuary for your people, untouched by my war. We will not bring the enemy to your doorstep. Hancock's expression fell slightly, a flicker of disappointment. But it was quickly replaced by a fierce pride. He was protecting her, even now. We will not take a territory from another power, Arashi continued, his eyes sweeping over his council. And we will not hide. We will build. We will find a place the world has forgotten, a people the world has forsaken, and we will make it our own. It was Robin who found it. She spent days poring over ancient, discarded naval charts and whispered Sayla's legends, cross-referencing them with information gleaned from the poneglyph she had seen in Alabasta. Here, she said one evening, pointing to a blank space on Nami's modern map. A notorious dead zone in the New World known for its unpredictable currents and magnetic fields that rendered log poses useless. According to these older texts, this area isn't empty. It contains a massive island, or perhaps a small continent. It was called, often, in the old tongue, the Serpent's Cradle. It was once a vibrant and prosperous kingdom, allied with the one the poneglyphs speak of. But after the Void Century, it was erased, wiped from all official records. Why? Nami asked, intrigued. Its people possessed a unique affinity for the land, Robin explained. A primitive form of what Arashi-san calls the dominion of the world. They were cultivators, not conquerors. The world government, in its infancy, likely saw this as a threat to their control. A people who could live off the land without need for trade or governance, or a people who cannot be controlled. Arashi's eyes lit up. A people who understand the will of the world. Take us there, Robin. Navigating to a place that didn't want to be found was a Herculean task. It took all of Robin's historical knowledge, all of Nami's navigational genius, and Arashi's own ability to feel the faint, dying whispers of the land itself. They sailed through a perpetual storm that seemed to guard the island, the dawnbreaker groaning under the strain, its infused wood the only thing keeping it from being torn apart. After weeks of battling the tempest, they broke through into a serene, sun-drenched sea. And there it was. Often, it was a land of breathtaking, savage beauty. Jagged, snow-capped mountains clawed at the sky, their slopes covered in emerald forests so dense they looked like a solid mass. Waterfalls, hundreds of feet high, cascaded into crystal-clear rivers that snaked through verdant plains. But it was a wounded beauty. As they drew closer, they saw the scars. The forests were patchy, with great swaths of dead, gray trees. The plains were barren in places, the soil cracked and dry. The main river delta was choked with a black, viscous sludge that poisoned the water for miles. And from the island, Arashi could feel it, a land in agony, and a people whose life foe. RCES were flickering embers of fear and despair. They anchored in a hidden cove and went ashore, cloaked and cautious. The main settlement they found was a depressing sight. The buildings were crumbling, the people gaunt and listless. They were ruled over by a brutal occupying force, the remnants of a powerful pirate crew that had been shattered after its captain challenged and was defeated by the Emperor Kaido. These pirates, led by a hulking brute named Grak, the Scourge, had stumbled upon the island and turned it into their personal fiefdom, hoarding the island's resources and terrorizing its people into submission. Arashi, Nami, Robin, and Hancock watched from a high ridge as Grak and his lieutenants executed a villager for failing to meet his weekly tribute of food. The Ophionians watched, their faces blank with a hopelessness so profound it was a physical presence. "They have forgotten how to fight back," Robin murmured, her voice laced with a sad understanding. "Their spirit has been broken for generations." "Not broken," Arashi corrected, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "Just dormant. It's time for a wake-up call." His plan was not a frontal assault. That would be a battle, not a liberation. The people needed to see not just a new master, but the birth of their own freedom. That night, the work began. It was a campaign of whispers and miracles. Robin, using her linguistic skills, deciphered the local dialect and began to speak with the elders in secret, telling them stories of their own forgotten history, of the powerful cultivators they once were. She was reintroducing them to their own identity. Nami, ever the economist, assessed the island's blighted resources. She identified the source of the river's poison, a crude mining operation Grak's men were running, leaking toxic runoff into the water. She began drawing up plans for irrigation, for crop rotation, for a sustainable economy that could make the island thrive. She was giving them a blueprint for a future. Hancock, the Empress, along with two of Arashi's most powerful clones, became a phantom of justice. They patrolled the island's borders, not as conquerors, but as guardians. Any of Grak's patrols that ventured too far into the wilderness to harass villagers would find themselves ambushed, disarmed, and left hanging upside down from trees, terrified and confused. She wasn't killing them. She was demonstrating that the pirates' power had limits. She was creating a safe space for hope to grow. And Arashi healed the land itself. He went to the great, dead patches of forest. He laced his hands on the petrified wood of the ancient trees. He closed his eyes and poured his own life force, his sage's dominion, into the very soil. He didn't just command it to live. He reminded it how. He connected it to the vibrant, living parts of the island, reigniting the dormant network of life that ran beneath the surface. The villagers watched from a distance, their eyes wide with disbelief. Over the course of a few days, they saw the impossible. Gray bark softened, regaining its color. Tiny, green buds appeared on branches that had been barren for a century. The soil darkened, turning rich and fertile before their very eyes. He was breathing life back into their world. He did the same for the poisoned river. He waded into the black sludge, the toxins sizzling against his hockey-infused skin. He plunged his arms into the water, and a brilliant, golden light spread from him, a tide of pure life energy. The sludge didn't just disperse, it broke down, its chemical bonds unmade by his disruptive power. The water ran clear for the first time in years. He was not a god descending from on high. He worked alongside the Ophionians who, emboldened by his presence, began to help. He taught them. He showed them how to feel the life of the soil, how to coax the seeds to grow, how to find the natural springs hidden deep in the mountains. He wasn't giving them food, he was returning their birthright. Grak, secure in his fortress carved into the island's largest mountain, was slow to notice. His tributes were shrinking, his patrols were being humiliated, and a strange mood of defiance was spreading through the villages. He dismissed it as a temporary annoyance. The tipping point came when an elder of the main village, inspired by Robin's stories and Arashi's miracles, openly refused to pay Grak's tribute. Grak was furious. He descended on the village with his entire force, ready to make an example of them all. He found the entire population of the island gathered in the central plaza. They were not cowering. They stood, unarmed but unafraid, behind four figures. Arashi, Nami, Robin, and Hancock. So, Grak sneered, his massive, scarred face twisting into a cruel grin. He was a giant of a man, with arms as thick as tree trunks. The rats have found a few bigger rats to lead them. I'll enjoy crushing you. Your rule over this island is over, Grak, Arashi said, his voice calm. Leave now, and you can live. Grak threw his head back and laughed, a booming, ugly sound. You and what army? Arashi smiled. This one. He looked back at the Ophionians. This is your home, he said, his voice resonating with power. Its life flows in your blood. You have felt it stirring. You have seen it return. Now, claim it. As one, the people have often stomped a foot on the ground. It was a simple, rhythmic act. But as they did, a faint, green light began to glow from the earth. The dormant power within them, reawakened by Arashi and their own returning hope, answered their call. Vines, thick as pythons, erupted from the ground, snaking around the legs of Grak's men, pulling them down. The very stones of the plaza shifted, tripping and trapping them. The pirates, so confident a moment before, found themselves fighting the island itself. Grak stared in shock, then roared in fury. Useless tricks. I'll kill you myself. He charged, his massive club held high, coated in a crude, brutish form of armament hockey. Hancock stepped forward, ready to intercept him, but Arashi held up a hand, stopping her. He's mine. Arashi met the charge. He didn't bother coating his arms in hockey. He simply met Grak's full power, two-handed swing with one open palm. The impact was immense. The ground for 20 feet around them shattered. But Arashi didn't move. He held the massive club an inch from his face. The force of the blow absorbed completely. Grak's eyes bulged. How? Your strength is hollow, Arashi said, his voice a low growl. It is born of cruelty and greed. You have no conviction. He squeezed his hand. The iron-banded club, a weapon that had crushed dozens of foes, cracked, then splintered into pieces in his grip. Before Grak could react, Arashi delivered a single, precise strike to the center of his chest. It was the same disruptive blow he had used on Arlong, but 100 times more potent. Grak's eyes rolled back in his head. His nervous system, his connection to his own physical power, was violently and permanently severed. He collapsed to the ground, not dead, but a powerless, twitching hulk, his mind fully aware but his body no longer his to command. The rest of the pirates, seeing their invincible leader felled by a single touch and the very island turning against them, threw down their weapons and surrendered. The celebration that followed was not one of feasting and drinking. It was one of planting. The Ophionians, their spirits finally free, went to work, rebuilding their home with a fervor born of generations of repressed hope. In the days that followed, the foundation of a new nation was laid. Arashi, Nami, Robin, and Hancock became its ruling council. Arashi, as the undisputed leader, focused on defense and healing the land. His clones, tireless and efficient, helped clear the toxic mines and construct new, sturdy homes. He was the heart of the island, his life force its engine. Nami, the council's chancellor of finance and a de facto prime minister, was a whirlwind of activity. She designed a new, sustainable economy based on the island's unique agricultural products and rare medicinal herbs. She established fair trade practices within the villages and began drawing up ambitious plans for a port and future trade routes with the outside world. She was the mind, giving their new nation direction and prosperity. Robin, as the keeper of lore and head of intelligence, became the soul of their nation. She established a library, teaching the young Ophionians to read and write, ensuring their history would never again be forgotten. She also began creating a network of contacts, using her underworld knowledge to gather information on the movements of the world government and the emperors. Hancock, the empress, took on the role of general and chief diplomat. Her reputation as a warlord and the fierce loyalty of her Kuja warriors, a contingent of whom she had summoned, made their fledgling nation a hard target. She trained the willing Ophionians in the art of hockey and self-defense, forging a formidable home guard. She was the nation's shield and its beautiful, terrifying face to the outside world. They made the island Shin Uzushio, New Uzushio, in honor of the swirling tides that guarded it and Arashi's own half-remembered ancestry from another life. It was a home, a sanctuary, and a declaration. The declaration did not go unnoticed. A report landed on the desk of the 5 elders, its contents so alarming that they convened an emergency session. "He's building a nation," one of the elders, a tall man with a long white beard, said. His voice grim. "On a phantom island, with a forgotten people. He's not just a pirate. He's a king. He has cultivated a populace, established a council, and is terraforming the island with his own power." Another added, "Intelligence reports suggest the island's productivity has increased 1,000-fold. It is already self-sufficient." An imposing, dark-skinned elder slammed his fist on the table. "This cannot be allowed. It is a direct challenge to our sovereignty. He is creating a haven for our enemies." The 5th elder, the one who had spoken to Garp, was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice cold and final. "Then we will treat it as such." Saint Icarus has grown impatient. He demands that this blasphemy be purged. He looked at the others. "Declare Shin Uzushio an enemy state. Authorize a full-scale assault. Give command of the fleet to the Aegis. Silas's shadow war is over. It is time for annihilation." In the command center of a state-of-the-art battlecruiser, the Statera, Silas watched a holographic projection of Shin Uzushio. His face was, as always, an unreadable mask of calm intellect. His shadow war had been effective, to a point. He had intercepted several ships carrying seeds and raw materials Nami had tried to procure. He had spread rumors among the underworld that the island was cursed, deterring potential pirate allies. But it was like trying to starve a forest that could grow its own fruit. "Sir," Cypher reported, "we have our orders. Direct from the 5 elders. Full fleet mobilization. Objective: total annihilation of all hostile entities and infrastructure on Offen." Silas nodded slowly, his gray eyes fixed on the glowing map. "So, the leash is off." He did not look pleased. He did not look excited. He was a surgeon who had been told to stop using a scalpel and start using a sledgehammer. It was messy, inefficient, but the objective remained the same. "Begin fleet preparations," he commanded. "Analyze all data we have on the anomaly's abilities and those of his council. I want predictive models for every possible defensive strategy. The Empress's Kuja warriors, the Navigator's economic countermeasures, the Archaeologist's intelligence network." He zoomed in on the image of Arashi, taken from the Marineford broadcast. He has built his perfect kingdom, a utopia founded on his personal power. A cult of personality. A flicker of something that might have been conviction entered his voice. Such systems are inherently unstable. They breed weakness and dependency. When the central pillar is removed, the entire structure collapses. Quote, he turned to Cypher. Our objective is not the island. It is him. We will stretch his forces thin. We will threaten his people. We will force him to choose between them. And when he is overextended, I will personally remove him from the equation. He looked back at the screen, a strange, almost regretful light in his eyes. A world built on the will of one man is a tyranny. No matter how benevolent, for the sake of true, lasting order, his dream must die. The Shadow War was over. The real war was about to begin. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Judgment of Icarus. The peace of Shin Uzushio was a living thing. It was in the rustle of the impossibly lush leaves, the chime of the wind through the newly carved eaves of the houses, and the laughter of children who had never known hunger. It was a fragile, beautiful creation, and Arashi could feel the approaching storm that meant to shatter it. He stood on the highest peak of the island, a place the Ophionians now called the Sage's Perch. His eyes were closed, his dominion of the world stretched across the sea like a vast, invisible net. He felt it days before it arrived, a fleet of cold, sharp signatures. A perfectly ordered armada that cut through the waves with chilling precision. They did not feel like marines, driven by dogma, or pirates, fueled by greed. This was something else, a soulless, clinical force. The Aegis. They're here, his voice echoed, not through the air, but directly into the minds of his council. In the newly built command center at the heart of the island, the three women received his message. The room was a marvel of Nami's design and Robin's historical knowledge, blending modern technology with the Ophionians' natural affinity for the land. A massive map of the island was carved into a single, polished slab of obsidian, glowing with faint green lines that represented the flow of life force through the land, a living tactical display. Nami was the first to react, her fingers flying across a Den Mushi switchboard. All coastal units, report. Southern Fleet. Activate cloaking protocols and move to intercept coordinates DELTA-7. I want our fast attack. Skiffs ready to harry their flanks the moment they enter the outer shoals. Her voice was sharp, professional, stripped of all but the necessities of command. She was no longer just a navigator, she was an admiral defending her home. Robin stood before a wall of whispered intelligence, reports from her burgeoning network of contacts. Their fleet numbers 30 vessels. 10 capital ships, 20 support frigates. They are flying the flag of the world government, but their hull design is unknown. State of the art. My sources say they call themselves the Aegis, Cypherpole's elite abnormal threat containment unit. Their commander is a man named Silas. They are not here to conquer, Arashi-san. Their mandate is erasure. Boa Hancock, clad in functional battle armor that still managed to be breathtakingly elegant, slammed a gauntleted fist on the table. Let them come, she declared, her voice ringing with the authority of an empress. My Kuja and the Shin Uzushio guard are ready. We will turn the shores red with their blood. Her confidence was a beacon, but Arashi could feel the tremor of fear for her people beneath it. No, Arashi's voice resonated in the room again. There will be no glorious last stand. We will not let them turn our home into a graveyard. Hancock, your forces are the final line of defense. Protect the people. Evacuate the coastal villages to the mountain sanctuaries. Robin, I need you to find the head. Who is Silas? What is his weakness? Nami, you are our first strike. You will not sink their fleet. You will disorient it, divide it, lead it into the traps we have prepared. His strategy was clear. He would not play their game of open warfare. He would make them fight the island itself, a battle they could not win. The Aegis fleet arrived with the cold, gray light of dawn. The ships were matte black, angled for stealth, cutting through the waves with an eerie silence. Silas stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Statera, his gray eyes fixed on the holographic display of Shin Uzushio. Sir, Cypher reported, we have entered the outer territorial waters. No resistance. They are waiting, Silas murmured. They know we are here. The anomaly's sensory capabilities are considerable. He tapped the display. Begin Phase 1. Deploy the disruptors. From the hulls of the Aegis frigates, strange, torpedo-like devices were launched. They didn't explode. They latched onto the seabed and began to emit a low, subsonic frequency. On the sage's perch, Arashi flinched. The humming, vibrant song of the island was suddenly filled with a grating, discordant static. It was a targeted attack, not on the land, but on his connection to it. His dominion of the world was being jammed. In the command center, the green lines on the obsidian map flickered and dimmed. "What's happening?" Nami cried out, her hand flying to her temple as a wave of nausea hit her. The Ophionians in the room moaned, clutching their heads. "They're trying to deafen me," Arashi's voice came, strained. "Robin, they're attacking the island's life frequency." Robin's eyes widened. He knows. Silas has studied the history of Ophin. He knows their power comes from their bond with the land. Silas was not just a warrior. He was a scholar of war, and he had done his homework. But Nami was a genius of controlled chaos. "Fine, if he wants to fight blind, so will we." She slammed a button. "Activate the fog banks." From hidden coves along the coastline, massive heating elements powered by geothermal vents were activated. They superheated the seawater, creating a thick, eternal fog that rolled across the ocean in minutes, blanketing the entire area in a whiteout. On the Statera's bridge, the holographic display turned to static. "Sir, all visual and sensor data is gone. The fog is unnatural. Standard thermal and radar are useless." "Clever," Silas said, a flicker of appreciation in his eyes. "She's leveled the playing field." He then pointed to a series of reefs. Nami had intentionally left off the falsified charts she'd allowed to be stolen by one of Robin's double agents. "Order the fleet to reduce speed and proceed in formation. They are trying to separate us." It was too late. Nami's skiffs, small, swift, and cloaked, darted out of the fog like piranhas. They weren't armed with cannons. They were armed with high-tension cables. They snagged the rudders of the Aegis frigates, yanking them off course, pulling them directly into the razor-sharp coral reefs that Nami knew like the back of her hand. The screech of tearing metal echoed through the fog. As 3 of the support ships were instantly crippled, their hulls breached. Silas's calm finally broke with a frown. "She is better than her file suggests. Cypher, deploy the sea prism nets. Box them in." But Nami's strategy was never to engage. Her skiffs released the cables and vanished back into the mist, their job done. She had drawn first blood and, more importantly, had thrown the Aegis's perfect formation into disarray. The main battle was now joined. The Aegis fleet, navigating the treacherous waters and the disorienting fog, was met by a storm. Not a natural one. Arashi, perched on his peak, raised his hands to the sky. While the disruptors interfered with his fine control, his raw power was untouched. He gathered the moisture from the fog and whipped the winds into a furious gale. A targeted hurricane descended upon the Aegis fleet. The ships were tossed like toys. Marines slid across the decks. But Silas was prepared. "Activate gravity anchors," he commanded. Heavy, humming pylons descended from the capital ships, sinking into the seabed and generating a powerful gravitational field that stabilized the vessels, holding them firm against the tempest. The Aegis was a force built to fight gods and monsters. They had a counter for everything. "Sir," an officer reported, "our beachhead force is ready. They will land on the northern shore, outside the main storm front." "Proceed," Silas ordered. "Draw out their ground forces. Draw out the Empress." The invasion began. Hundreds of Aegis soldiers, clad in black armor and wielding strange, energy-dampening rifles, stormed the beaches. They were met by the Kuja. The battle was fierce. The Kuja were masters of hockey, but the Aegis soldiers were brutally efficient, their tactics designed to break formations and isolate strong fighters. Hancock entered the fray like a goddess of war. Her kicks turned soldiers to stone, her arrows flew true. She was a whirlwind of destruction, trying to hold the line. But the Aegis soldiers were relentless. For every one she defeated, 2 more took their place, their numbers seeming endless. They were slowly, methodically pushing her and her warriors back. In the command center, Robin's face was pale. "His strategy is attrition," she said. "He's using his superior numbers to exhaust Hancock's forces. He's treating his own men as expendable pawns to drain our queen." And then came the masterstroke. "Arashi." Robin's voice was urgent in his mind. Silas isn't on the flagship. His life signature just vanished from it. He's on the move. Arashi's eyes snapped open. He understood. The fleet, the storm, the beach invasion, it was all a distraction. A grand, elaborate feint designed to draw his attention and the focus of his counsel. He turned, his senses piercing through his own storm, ignoring the fleet. Ignoring the ground battle, he searched for that one, single signature. Cold, analytical, and filled with a chillingly pure conviction. He found it, halfway up the mountain, coming for him. I see him, Arashi projected. Counsel, you have your orders. Hold the line, I will deal with the head of the snake. He leapt from the perch, his body a golden streak against the gray storm clouds. Descending toward the challenger, he met Silas on a wide, flat plateau halfway down the mountain. The leader of the Aegis stood alone, the wind whipping his immaculate white coat. He was not a physically imposing man, but his presence was sharp, like the edge of a scalpel. In his hands, he held two spools of almost invisible, micro-thin wire, which glinted in the storm's lightning. Arashi, Silas said, his voice as calm as if they were meeting for tea. The anomaly. The false savior. Silas, Arashi replied, landing softly. The government's dog. You come to my home, you attack my people, you poison my land, and you call me the false savior. I do what is necessary to maintain order, Silas stated, his gray eyes unwavering. You offer a dream of freedom, but T is a dream predicated on your power alone. You are a single point of failure. Your utopia is a cult. When you fall, it will crumble into chaos and internecine warfare. I am here to prevent that greater tragedy by enacting a smaller one. You talk of order, Arashi sneered, but you serve chaos. You serve the whims of the celestial dragons, the most chaotic and destructive force in this world. The celestial dragons are a regrettable, but necessary, component of the current world structure, Silas replied, a flicker of distaste in his eyes. They are a symbol, a crude one, but a symbol of T. He authority that prevents the entire world from descending into anarchy. Your existence threatens that symbol. Therefore, you must be removed. Enough philosophy, Arashi growled. The time for talk was over. He charged. Silas did not move. He simply flicked his wrists. The nigh invisible wires shot out, creating a complex web in the space between them. Arashi, moving at blinding speed, suddenly found his path blocked. He swerved, but the wires were everywhere, a three-dimensional cage manifesting around him. He coated his arm in hockey and swiped at a wire. To his shock, his hand passed right through it. But he felt a searing pain. And a deep gash appeared on his arm. My wires are a molecular monofilament, infused with a low-level electrical charge, Silas explained, his voice clinical. Your armament hockey can coat your skin. But it cannot stop something that is thinner than the space between your cells. It is not about overwhelming your defense. It is about rendering it irrelevant. It was the ultimate expression of Silas's philosophy, brute force against precision. Arashi backed away, his mind racing. He created 3 clones, sending them to attack Silas from different angles. Silas was a whirlwind of motion. His wires became extensions of his body, a deadly dance. He moved with the fluid grace of Rokushiki, using Soru to reposition, Geppo to gain height. The clones were iced into ribbons of dissipating energy before they could even get close. Silas wasn't just a strategist, he was a master combatant. Your clones share your essence, Silas observed. A clever tactic, but they are predictable, and their energy signature can be traced. Arashi changed his approach. He stopped trying to get close. He gathered energy, forming a brilliant, silent sphere of manifest will in his palm. He hurled it at Silas. Silas didn't try to block it. He spun, his wires creating a parabolic cage in front of him. The sphere hit the web of wires, and the electrical charge within them acted as a conductor. The sphere's energy, instead of exploding, was caught, channeled, and redirected harmlessly into the sky as a brilliant beam of light. Silas had analyzed his powers from the Marineford broadcast. He had developed a counter for every move Arashi had shown. Your power is magnificent, Arashi, Silas said, a genuine note of intellectual respect in his voice. But it is raw will. It is the power of a god. I am merely a man. And the story of humanity is the story of men learning to chain gods. Arashi felt a surge of frustration, but he crushed it. This was a battle of intellects as much as power. Silas was anticipating his every move, countering his strengths. So he had to do something Silas couldn't predict. He had to use a power Silas didn't know he had. He stopped fighting. He closed his eyes and stood perfectly still on the plateau. Silas paused, his wires humming around him. Surrender. It is not in your psychological profile. I'm not surrendering, Arashi said, his eyes still closed. I'm listening. He wasn't reaching out to the island. He was reaching out to the people. He opened his mind, his dominion of the soul connecting not to attack, but to share. He projected his own unwavering will, his belief in their future, to every single person on Shin Uzushio. And in return, he felt their will flowing back into him. The fierce, protective love of Hancock for her people. The sharp, defiant ambition of Nami. The quiet, resilient hope of Robin. The newfound, iron-hard resolve of the Ophionians. It was a torrent of pure, unadulterated conviction. He was not a single point of failure. He was the focal point of a collective dream. Silas felt it. The very air grew thick, heavy with an unseen pressure. The anomaly's energy signature, which his devices had been tracking, began to skyrocket. Becoming unstable, chaotic. What are you doing? Silas demanded, his composure finally cracking. Arashi opened his eyes. They were no longer just blue. They were blazing gold, burning with the light of 1,000 souls. My power isn't mine alone, Silas, Arashi said, his voice now a chorus of many. It is the will of my people, given form. He raised his hand. No technique, no energy sphere. He just pointed a finger at Silas. And from the sky, a bolt of pure, solid golden lightning, a physical manifestation of a nation's collective will, crashed down. Silas's wires flew up, forming his most complex defensive web. But this was not an attack he could analyze or redirect. It was not energy. It was pure, conceptual force. The lightning did not strike his wires. It simply erased them from existence. It struck Silas, and his world became white-hot pain and overwhelming, undeniable truth. He did not just feel the force of the blow. He felt everything Arashi had felt. The hope of the Ophionians. The fierce loyalty of his council. He saw the world Arashi was trying to build, not as a cult, but as a genuine sanctuary. He felt the pure, untainted love he people had for their home and for the man who had given it back to them. He saw his own order for what it was. A sterile, gray prison, built on the cynical belief that people could not be trusted with their own freedom. His conviction, the bedrock of his entire existence, shattered. His belief in his righteous cause was burned away by the simple, profound truth of a people's hope. Silas collapsed to his knees. His wires falling limp, his body smoking. He was defeated, not by a stronger blow, but by a stronger idea. Arashi walked toward him, his own power receding, his eyes returning to their normal blue. He stood over the broken man. It's over, Silas. But it wasn't. As the storm Arashi had summoned began to dissipate, the clouds parted. A shadow fell over the plateau. A pressure, 1,000 times more immense and absolute than anything Arashi had ever felt, descended upon the island. Every single person on Shin Uzushio, Nami, Robin, Hancock, the Kuja, the Ophionians, even the Aegis soldiers, froze. It was not a power they could fight. It was a pressure on reality itself, a command to be still. A figure descended from the heavens, bathed in a celestial light. He wore immaculate white robes, and his face was beautiful and serene, yet held an expression of utter, cosmic disappointment. He was one of the 5 elders, but he was more. This was Saint Icarus. Filth, the word echoed, not in their ears, but in their souls. Such a beautiful, pristine world, and you insects insist on smearing your meaningless struggles across it. He looked down at the defeated Silas, a frown of distaste on his perfect face. And you, my most promising tool. You have failed. You allowed yourself to be swayed by the mewling of primitives. A flaw in your design, it seems. He raised a single, elegant finger. His gaze fell upon the crippled Aegis ships in the bay. Break, he commanded. The ships, marvels of engineering, simply broke. Their hulls split. Their masts snapped. They folded in on themselves as if crushed by an invisible giant, sinking into the depths in seconds. There was no explosion, No sound. Just an order, and reality obeying. He then looked to the mountain where Hancock and her forces were. He saw a section of the mountain that had been fortified, a sanctuary for the children. Fall, Saint Icarus said, his voice bored. The entire mountainside gave a sickening lurch. The stone groaned, fractured, and began to slide, an avalanche aimed directly at the sanctuary. Arashi roared, a sound of pure fury. He created a dozen clones instantly, sending them to intercept the falling rock, to form a shield over the people. But he knew it was a temporary measure. This power was on another level entirely. It wasn't hockey. It wasn't a devil fruit. It was authority. Saint Icarus finally turned his full attention to Arashi, his eyes holding a cold, ancient light. And you, the anomaly, the corruption, you are a discordant note in the perfect symphony of my creation. He smiled, a terrible, passionless thing. It is time for the conductor to demand silence. He raised his hand toward Arashi. Cease. Chapter 6 End.